The instrument was already reading wrong when First Surgeon Oruvith leaned into the light and understood that the wound was closing under his hands. He had opened the human's forearm 4 minutes earlier. A clean channel, palm deep, held apart by the small silver rakes the weave used on soft-bodied client stock, and into that channel he had threaded the renewal, the strand his people had guarded for 9,000 seasons, the gift that let a Sethiri regrow a severed digit across a slow winter and a lost limb across 3. He had seeded it the way the doctrine required, one measured trace at the base of the cut, and he had reached for the settling key to lock its pace before it could take. The key was still in his second hand. The cut had not waited for it. The edges of the channel had pulled toward each other while he watched, not with the pale creep of Sethiri mending, but as a thing in a hurry, a seam drawing shut like water finding its level, and the silver rakes bent and then popped free and rang once on the tray because the flesh no longer needed them to stay open. He set the settling key down without deciding to. Around him, the ward hummed its ordinary hum. On the wall, the depth gauge that should have crept climbed instead, a bright thread rising through numbers no graft was meant to reach, and Veith stood with his 4 hands open over a forearm that was, by every rule he had been given, impossible. "Reth," he said, "the gauge." His junior came around the table. Rethasu was young in the work, still narrow through the shoulders, still prone to reading a room by its instruments before its faces. He looked at the wall and made the small closing sound the Sethiri made when a number offended them. "It's faulted," Reth said. "It has to be faulted. Nothing seeds that fast. I'll swap the head." "Don't swap the head." "Adept." "Look at the arm." Reth looked at the arm. The channel was a line now, a pale wheel where a palm-deep opening had been, and as they watched even the wheel began to lose its edges, the way a footprint in wet sand loses its edges when the tide comes back over it. There was no swelling. There was no heat that Veith's palms could feel through the film of his gloves. There was only the tissue doing in minutes what the renewal had been designed, across all the careful centuries, to do across a season, and doing it without the settling key, which meant doing it without a break, which meant doing it without him. He had grafted the renewal into client stock 11 times in his career. Each time it had taken the way doctrine promised, slowly, gratefully, leaning on the key like an old animal leaning on a fence. The client woke healed of one small thing and dependent for the rest of its life on the surgeon who held its counter key, and that dependency was the point, was the whole architecture of the weave's mercy. You did not give a lesser species the power to knit its own body and then walk away. You gave it a leash of flesh, and you kept the other end. The human had no leash. The human had swallowed the leash and grown past the length of it in the time it took to say so. "Bring me her file," Veith said, "and close the ward. No one in the corridor, no one on the record but us until I understand what I am looking at." Reth hesitated, which was not like him. The Prime asked for a report at each stage. She was specific about the stages. The Prime asked for a report on a graft. "This is not a graft. When I know what it is, she can have every word of it." He did not raise his voice. Sethiri did not raise their voices in the ward. The ward was where they were most themselves, most exact, and volume was a thing that happened to lesser species when their certainty failed them. "Go." The human on the table had not moved through any of it. That was the second thing that would not leave him later, when there was a later, and he was trying to explain to a room full of adepts how the whole architecture had come apart in an afternoon. The gauge was the first thing. The stillness of the human was the second. She lay on the client cradle with her grafted arm loose at her side and her eyes half open, tracking the light, tracking him, and there was nothing in her face that he had a name for. Not the flat terror of the reptile casts when they woke on his table, not the wet begging of the mottled ones, not even pain, though he had cut her without deadening the flesh, because doctrine held that client stock read truer awake, and she had felt every centimeter of it and made no sound he had bothered to note. She was watching him work, She had been watching him work the whole time, the way he watched an instrument, and it had not troubled him until now because a specimen watching the surgeon was only a specimen with open eyes. Her name on the file Reth brought back was rendered as Mara Kell. Origin: a survey convoy taken at the Ashet Verge 11 days prior. 3 humans recovered alive, 2 expended in intake pressure trials. This one held back because she was small and quiet and had healed a cracked wrist bone during holding without any care being given to it, which was the note that had brought her to Veith's ward in the first place. Sethiri did not heal without the renewal. That a Deathworld animal did it on its own, casually in a cell, was the kind of anomaly the Weave logged and then handed to a first surgeon to explain. Homeworld, the file said, was registered to the human range. A body the Weave's registry marked a Grade 9 terminal world, 1 step below the sealed grades, the grades no client was drawn from because nothing drawn from them had ever been made to serve. Veith had read the notation 100 times on 100 intake sheets and let it mean nothing. Grade 9 terminal, a high number on a scale that mostly measured how quickly a place would kill you. He had filed it, as everyone filed it, under weather and predators and the general inconvenience of savage worlds, and he had never once let it mean what it was plainly telling him, which was that everything that had ever lived on that world and gone on living had done so by out-repairing the thing that was trying to end it. He looked from the file to the arm to the still small face, and he made himself say it in the doctrine's own words, because the doctrine was the only handhold he had. "The graft has overtaken," he said, for the record Reth was now quietly keeping. "Renewal expression is elevated beyond the settling range. We will down-regulate and reseat the key." "With respect," Reth said, "the settling range doesn't have a top. That's the point of it. It's not supposed to be possible to be above it." "Then we've found the top." Veith reached for the counter key, the paired instrument that carried the quieting sequence, the hand at the other end of every leash he had ever tied, "and we'll put her back under it." The counter key was a thing of great subtlety. It did not cut. It spoke, in the chemical grammar the renewal understood, a single patient sentence that meant slow, that meant enough, that meant wait for the one who holds me. In 11 graftings it had never failed, because the renewal was a disciplined guest that had spent 9,000 seasons learning to listen for exactly that sentence and obey it. Veith spoke the sentence into Mara Kell's grafted arm. For a moment he would swear to the moment, later in front of the Prime, and then in front of colder rooms than the Prime. It worked. The bright thread on the gauge faltered. The runaway seam of her healing paused as though it had heard something and turned its head. He felt the old satisfaction rise in him, the surgeon's satisfaction of a tool obeying, and he had actually begun to compose the report in his mind. The graft has overtaken and been resettled, an anomaly of the human range, notable and contained. And then the thread climbed again, not slowly. It climbed the way it had climbed before, past the falter, past the number where it had paused, up into the reachless part of the gauge where the display had no marks left to give and simply showed the color it showed, when a client's body had already done a thing the machine was built to call fatal. "Again," Veith said and spoke the sentence again, more of it, the long form, the version doctrine reserved for a graft that had turned and begun to consume its host. Because a renewal without a key did turn always, that was the terror the doctrine was built around. An unsettled renewal ate the body it was meant to save, and the counter key was as much a mercy as a leash. He gave her the whole long quieting. He gave her enough to stop a Sethiri's mending cold for a season. Her body took the sentence the way a river takes a stone dropped from a bridge. He watched the counter key's meaning enter her arm and vanish into her, swallowed, dispersed, answered by nothing, and the gauge did not so much as flinch. "It's not reaching," Reth said very quietly, all the youth gone out of his voice. "Adept, the counter key isn't reaching her." "I heard the gauge. It's not that it's failing, it's that there's too much of it, the renewal. It's not one graft anymore, it's..." Reth stopped, because the word he wanted was a word from outside the ward, a field word, a word for weather, and he was too well trained to use it about a body. It's Capit itself, past counting. The counter key is one voice and it's speaking into a crowd. She's rewritten the guest. There are too many of it to leash. The human on the table turned her head, slowly, the small, deliberate movement of a person conserving something, and looked at the junior surgeon who had just said, out loud, the thing. "You made it," Marakel said. Her voice was low and even and entirely without heat, and she spoke the weave's trade cant in the flattened accent the intake trials beat into human throats, and it was the first full sentence Veith had heard her speak. "Now it's mine. You should have kept the leash shorter." She did not smile. That was the thing Veith carried longest. A lesser species, cut open and awake and grafted with a power its makers no longer controlled, and it did not smile, did not weep, did not threaten. It corrected his junior's terminology and lay still, and watched him with the exact attention he had been giving his instruments, and waited to see what he would try next so that it could learn from it. Veith set the counter key down beside the settling key, the two halves of a control he no longer held, and for the first time in a career built entirely on knowing more than the thing on the table, he understood that he was the one being studied. He straightened. He kept his four hands still, because still hands were the last authority a surgeon had. "Log it as a runaway expression and seal the ward under my seal," he told Reth. "No transmission to the prime until I've characterized it. If she asks, the graft is proceeding and observation is ongoing." That is not a lie. It's not entirely true. "Nothing in this ward is going to be entirely true again," Veith said. "For a long while, seal it." Behind him, on the cradle, the human closed her eyes, the way a body closes its eyes when it has decided the interesting part is over for now, and it intends to save its strength. The forearm he had opened was already a limb that had never been opened, unmarked, unmemoried, the flesh so completely restored that even the fine map of scars every human wore, and he had noted at intake that this one wore a great many had begun, at the edges of his sight, to smooth. He did not know yet that this was the smallest thing her body would undo. He only knew that the leash was gone, that he had put a power into a grade 9 terminal animal, and the animal had multiplied it past his reach in the length of an afternoon, and that the animal had thanked him for it by telling him, without heat, exactly what he had done wrong. The ward hummed its ordinary hum. Nothing in it was ordinary. Veith stood in the bright, even light of a station that had never once had a bad afternoon and began, very carefully, to be afraid. By the second day, Veith had stopped calling it a graft, even in his own notes. He had spent the night alone in the sealed ward with the human and a bank of instruments, and he had done what a first surgeon did when doctrine ran out. He had begun to measure the thing on its own terms rather than his. He gave her water and a paste of the neutral client feed and watched her take both without comment, and then he began, carefully, methodically, to hurt her, because measuring a renewal meant giving it work to do and watching how it answered. He was not cruel. He would hold to that later, in the way a man holds to the one plank still above water. He was a surgeon of the weave, and cruelty was imprecise, and imprecision was the only true sin his people recognized. What he did to Marakel over the second day, and the third he did the way he would have done it to any grafted stock whose expression he needed to chart. A measured injury, a timed observation, a number written down, and the only thing that made it monstrous was that she was awake for all of it and did not once stop watching him and did not once break. He made a small cut along the back of her hand and timed the closing. 40 seconds. He made the same cut deeper, to the tendon, the kind of wound that would cost a client cast a limb's use for a season even with the renewal singing in it, and he timed that too. A little under 2 minutes, and when it was closed the hand opened and shut, the tendon not merely healed but retensioned, tuned, better seated than it had been before he cut it. "You're timing it," Mara said on the third such cut. She had a way of stating the obvious that was not stupid, that was, he came to realize, a kind of accounting. She said aloud the thing he was doing so that both of them would know she had seen it. "You want to know how fast? It's faster when you go deeper. Did you write that down?" He had written it down. He did not tell her he had written it down. "You should give me more food if you wanted to keep timing well," she said, and lay back and closed her eyes. That was true, and it unsettled him more than the numbers. The renewal in a Cythery was a slow debt against the body's whole store, which was why the doctrine paced it, why an unsettled one consumed its host. It was a fire, and a fire without a governor burned the house to warm one room. In Mara Kell the fire should have consumed her twice over by the second day. She should have wasted to nothing, her body eaten out from within to feed a healing that never stopped. Instead she asked for more feed, ate it without hurry, and burned it clean. Her body had not only multiplied the renewal past the leash, it had solved the debt. It ran the fire and paid for the fire and did not so much as sweat. And when he looked at his charts, he saw a metabolism doing arithmetic his entire science said could not close, and closing it, casually, the way she said everything. On the third day the Prime came to the ward. Prime Adept Ithuan was old even for a Cythery, her forearms gone thin and precise with age, her scholar's caste marks worn to shadows on the pale membrane of her face. She had run the Ashet Reach ward for 200 seasons, and she had authorized the human trials herself, over the objections of the softer adepts, on the grounds that a grade 9 terminal range that could be made to serve would be worth more to the weave than any client caste yet leashed. She came to see her investment, and Veith met her at the ward's inner seal and told her, standing very still, exactly enough of the truth to buy another day. "The graft is overexpressed," he said, "well past the settling range. The counterkey is not seeding. I am characterizing the expression before I attempt a second reseed." Ithuan looked past him to the cradle, where the small human lay watching them both with her unnameable patience. "Overexpression is a failure state," the Prime said. "You lose the stock and you learn the boundary. Why is it still breathing?" "Because it isn't a failure state. It isn't consuming her." The Prime went still in the particular way of a Cythery, encountering an impossibility she did not yet believe. An unsettled renewal always consumes the host. "In us," Veith said, "it consumes us. It is not consuming her. She is running it and feeding it, and it is making her," he chose the word with a surgeon's care, "more intact than when we opened her. Prime, I don't have doctrine for this. I have 3 days of numbers that say the guest we invented has been copied past counting inside a grade 9 range, that the counterkey speaks into it and drowns, and that the host is not a victim of it. She is its owner." He watched the Prime hear the word owner and reject it, because the weave's entire relationship to the renewal was that no lesser thing could own it. That ownership of the mending was the one power that separated the Cythery from every client they had ever knelt. Ithuan crossed to the cradle. She looked down at Mara Kell the way one looks at a fault in a wall one has leaned on for 200 seasons. "Cut it," the Prime told Veith, "deeply, in front of me. I want to see the failure with my own membrane." So he did. He was a first surgeon, and the Prime had given a lawful order, and he told himself, opening a long channel down the human's thigh, muscle deep, the kind of wound that killed unaided humans in minutes, that he was following a procedure and not doing a thing he would carry. Mara Kell drew a breath through her teeth, the first sound like pain he had heard from her, and gripped the edge of the cradle, and did not scream, and looked not at the wound but at the Prime, holding the old Cythery's gaze while her thigh was laid open, and said, "In the flat trade can't. You're going to want to write down how long the next part takes, too." The next part took 90 seconds. The Prime watched a killing wound close over muscle that reknit invisible ribbons, watched the skin come back unmarked, watched the human's breathing settle from the ragged edge back to its low, even count. And the Prime, who had authorized the expending of 2 humans in pressure trials without a flicker, stepped back from the cradle and put out one thin hand to the wall as though the floor had shifted. "Receipt the key," Ithuan said. "Now both keys, the full quieting, I'll witness it." "I've given her the full quieting," Veith said. "Twice it drowns." "Then give it to her 10 times. He gave it to her 10 times. He stood at the cradle with both halves of the leash in his 4 hands, and he spoke the whole architecture of Sethiri control into the body of a small human woman, the slow, the enough, the wait for the one who holds you, the long form and the terminal form, and the form reserved for a renewal that had turned to eat its host. Every sentence his people had spent 9,000 seasons learning to make the mending obey. Marakel lay still and let him. She did not fight it because there was nothing to fight. The sentences went into her and dispersed like dye in a sea, met by a thing so multiplied, so utterly hers, that the meaning simply did not carry. He might as well have whispered stop to a tide. When he stopped, sweat standing on his own membrane, the prime was silent for a long time. "How long?" Ithuan said finally. "Until she can be moved to the sealed labs at the Weave's core." And there it was, the thing Veith had been keeping out of his notes because writing it made it real. The prime was not looking at a failed graft. The prime was looking at an asset, a human that could not be leashed but could, perhaps, be caged, a grade 9 terminal body that ran the Weave's most guarded gift past all control and paid its debt and healed from a killing wound in 90 seconds. That was not a mistake to be logged and expended. That was the most valuable specimen the ward had ever held, and the prime's mind had already moved past the horror into the arithmetic of keeping it. "She heals," Veith said carefully. "She does not fly. She is a small, unaugmented human in every way but the one. You could move her tomorrow." "Could I hold her once she's there?" He did not answer at once, and the human answered for him. "No," Marakel said to the prime in the same low, even voice, still lying open-eyed on the cradle with her thigh made new. "You couldn't, but you'll try, and it'll take you a while to be sure, and I'll learn everything about how you try while you're trying it. That's the part you should be writing down." The prime looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned to Veith and said, "It's talking too much." In the flat clinical Sethiri way that meant she had heard the human perfectly and did not intend to admit that a specimen had frightened her. Deaden its voice work before transport. "And Veith, the 2 humans we expended in the pressure trials, were they from the same convoy?" "The same convoy." "Then their range is the same as hers." The prime's worn cast marks caught the light. "This is not one animal. This is a sample of a range. If one grade 9 terminal body does this with the renewal, the range does this. We have been drawing clients from the wrong shelf for 9,000 seasons." She said it without appetite and without fear, the way the old and precise say the largest things, and then she left the ward, and the seal cycled shut behind her, and Veith was alone again with his numbers and the small human who had just, without raising her voice, told the prime adept of the Ashit reach the shape of the thing that was coming. He crossed to the cradle. He should have deadened her voice work. The prime had ordered it, and it was within his craft, a small severing that would leave her healing untouched but take her speech for a season. He stood over her with the instrument in his hand and found he could not begin. "You won't do it," Mara said. She was not gloating. She was, again, only accounting, reading him the way she read everything, out loud, so they would both know. "Not because you're kind. You're not kind. You cut me 9 times in 3 days and wrote down the numbers. You won't do it because you want to know what I am, and you can't learn it from a thing that can't answer. I'm the only interesting problem you've ever had. You're not going to break the only part of it that talks back." She was right, and the accuracy of it went through him like cold water. He set the instrument down. "Why don't you fight?" he said. It was not a surgeon's question. It was the first thing he had asked her that came from outside his craft, and he heard the difference in his own voice and could not stop it. "You heal from anything I do. You could have healed through the restraints days ago, tear the flesh, slip the cradle, it costs you nothing. You'd be whole again before you reach the seal. You've done the arithmetic, you said as much to the prime. So why are you still lying on my table letting me cut you? Mirakel was quiet for a while. When she answered, it was slower than her other answers. The only time in 3 days he heard her weigh a thing before she said it. Because I'm still learning the building, she said. You've got one seal I could tear a wrist to open. Past it you've got a corridor I've never seen, and a station I've never seen, and a whole reach of your people between me and anything that isn't your people. I heal. I don't walk through walls, and I don't come back from having no head, and I'd bet a lot that somewhere in this station is somebody whose whole job is making sure I find that out. She turned her head and looked at him, and there was nothing in her face still, no fear and no threat, only the flat, patient attention that had unsettled him since the first afternoon. So I lie here. I let you cut me, and every time you do, you show me one more thing about how you people think a body is supposed to work, what surprises you, what you reach for, what you're sure of. You've been studying my flesh for 3 days, surgeon. I've been studying you for the same 3 days. I think I'm further along. Veith stood in the humming light of his sealed ward and understood that she had told him the truth, all of it, without heat and without hurry, because the truth cost her nothing, and watching him receive it taught her one more thing about how he thought. He did not deaden her voice. He told the log that the procedure was scheduled and pending. It was the second not entirely true thing he had entered in 3 days, and he was beginning to understand that the human had been right about that, too, that nothing in his ward was going to be entirely true again for a long while, and that the small, still animal on the cradle had known it before he did. He spent the 4th day trying to find the wall, because a surgeon who cannot find the wall does not have a science, he has a rumor. Everything his craft knew about a body was a set of walls. This much blood loss and the animal fails. This much tissue gone and the limb does not return. This deep a cut and the mending, even the renewal's mending, cannot bridge the gap. Veith went looking for Mirakel's walls the way a man walks a dark room with his hands out, expecting, at any step, to meet the edge of the thing. He did not meet it. He took her past the loss that killed unaided humans and she stayed. He took her past the loss that killed grafted clients and she stayed. He took her to the edge of what the renewal itself was built to survive, the point where doctrine held that even a settled, leashed, obedient graft gave up the host as unrecoverable. And Mirakel lay on the cradle and metabolized the feed he gave her and stayed. And when he looked at his instruments for the wall, the instruments showed him only more of the same climbing thread, the fire running and paying and running, and no edge anywhere in the room. "You're looking for the place I stop," Mara said on the 4th day, watching him the way she watched everything. "There isn't one you can reach with what's on that tray. You'd have to take my head and you won't, because a thing with no head can't tell you numbers, and numbers are the only thing you love." She let that stand flat in accounting. "You should stop looking for the wall and start asking why there isn't one. That's the actual question. You keep asking the small one because the big one scares you." It did scare him. It scared him the way a fault in a load-bearing wall scares a man who has slept 200 seasons in the building. And so he did the thing a frightened surgeon does. He called in another surgeon, so that the fear would have a second witness and stop being only his. The specialist adept the prime sent was named Suvatharan, a cold, precise elder of the mending caste who had spent a long career being the one they called when a first surgeon's instruments lied. And Suvatharan came into the sealed ward, already certain that the whole business was a measurement error. Because the alternative was a thing the mending caste did not have a shelf for. "Show me the fault in your gauge," the specialist said, "and we will both be spared the prime's afternoon." Veith did not show him a fault in the gauge. He showed him the human. He opened a channel down the back of Mirakel's forearm, deep in front of the specialist, and Suvatharan watched a killing depth of tissue knit itself closed in under 2 minutes without the settling key, and the cold, precise elder went very quiet in the way of a Sethiri whose certainty has just met the room's edge. Receipt the key, Suvatharan said. Your counter key in front of me. I want to rule out a fault in the instrument before I rule out a fault in the world. Rule out the instrument, Veith agreed, and spoke the counter key's quieting sentence into the human's arm, the whole long form, the way he had spoken it a dozen times now, and the specialist watched the meaning go into Mara Kell and disperse and be answered by nothing, the gauge not so much as flinching, the leash drowning in the flood exactly as it had drowned on the first afternoon. Suvatharan was silent for a long moment. Then, in the flat clinical voice the mending cast kept for the largest things, the specialist said, "The counter key is not faulted." "No." "And it is not reaching." "No." "Then the fault," Suvatharan said slowly, arriving where Veith had arrived on the first afternoon and hating it as much, "is not in the instrument." "There it is," Mara Kell said from the cradle without heat, watching the second Setheri in 4 days do the arithmetic and flinch from the answer. "That's twice now. You people build a beautiful key and you're so proud of the key that when it stops working you check the key and check the key and check the key, and it takes you 4 days and 2 surgeons to look at the lock." She turned her head to the specialist. "The lock's me. There's no fault. You made a thing that heals a little on a leash, and you put it in a body that heals a lot off any leash you own, and it did exactly what a body like mine does with anything you give it. It took it, and it kept it, and it made it ours. Write that down. It's the only true thing either of you has measured all week." Suvatharan left the ward without another word and did not come back, and Veith understood, watching the specialist go, that the fear had a second witness now and had not gotten smaller for the sharing, that it had instead done the thing fear does when a second careful mind confirms it, and become a fact. 2 surgeons of the weave had now watched the counter key drown. 2 surgeons of the weave now knew that a grade 9 terminal animal had taken the most guarded gift of the mending cast and multiplied it past the reach of every lock they owned. The idea was no longer his alone to seal. It was in the specialist's silence now, and the specialist reported to the prime, and the prime, Veith knew, did not keep a fact like that on a shelf. She acted on it. The only question left was how large the action would be, and Mara Kell, lying still on the cradle with her forearm made new for the second time in a day, had already told him the shape of the answer 3 days running, flat and unhurried, and been logged each time as talking too much. They moved her on the 5th day, and it was Mara Kell, not the surgeon, who chose when it would begin. She had spent 4 days doing the thing she was good at, which was not healing. Healing was only what her body did. What Mara did was watch. She lay on the cradle and let the tall, pale, 4-armed people cut her and feed her and speak their soft, even language over her head, and she took all of it apart the way she had once, in a life that felt like someone else's, taken apart the field autoclave when it seized in the middle of a run, and there was no manual and 3 people bleeding. You did not panic. You looked at the thing until it stopped being a wall and started being a set of parts, and then you found the part that moved. The station was a set of parts. The seal on the ward moved when the surgeon's palm crossed it, and it moved when the old one, the prime, crossed it, and it moved for the junior who read gauges before faces, and she had spent 4 days learning the small differences in how each of them stood when they did it. The transport would be more parts. A cradle that unlocked. A corridor she'd never seen. A cart, hands on her. A route through a station full of people whose whole certainty was that a thing on a cradle stayed a thing on a cradle. She let them believe it. She was very good at letting people believe things. It was most of what being small and quiet had ever bought her. When the transport crew came, it was 6 of them, and a heavier cast she hadn't seen before, squat, gray-plated, 2-armed, the kind of body the tall scholarly ones clearly kept around for exactly this, for the moment when something on a cradle stopped being a thing. The surgeon was there. Veith. She had a name for him now, and she used it in her head like a tool she'd cleaned and set on the tray. He stood at the head of the cradle with his 4 still hands, and he did not look at her the way the others did. The others looked at cargo. Veith looked at a question he hadn't finished asking, and that was the part of him she meant to use when the corridor came. "Transfer to Core Lab Holding," the heavy one said, "in worse trade can't than the surgeons. Sedate it for the corridor." "You can't sedate her," Veith said. "Nothing seats. She metabolizes it before it reads. I've filed all of this." "Then restrain it heavier." "You can restrain her all you like. It won't matter." And there Mara heard it, the thing under the surgeon's flat voice, the thing he wasn't saying to the heavy gray cast because saying it would cost him standing. He knew restraints wouldn't matter, and he wanted to see what she would do when they proved it, more than he wanted her held. He was still studying. He was going to keep studying right up until it killed someone, because he was the kind of mind that would rather understand a fire than put it out. "Good," she thought without heat. "Keep watching, surgeon. You taught me the leash. Watch me teach you the corridor." They unlocked the cradle. 6 sets of restraints, gray cast muscle at her shoulders and hips, the whole apparatus of a people absolutely sure that the problem with a dangerous body was that it needed to be held tighter. They wheeled her out of the sealed ward and into a corridor of bright even daylight, real daylight. She registered, filtered down through a high dome. The sky of a world she'd never see, the ground of pouring pale and enormous over the whole cold clean length of the place. And Mara Kell lay still under the light and counted. She counted the turns, she counted the seals. She counted the crew and where their hands were, and the exact moment the heavy gray cast at her left shoulder shifted his grip to key open the 3rd seal and left, for less than a breath, the whole left side of her unheld. That was the part that moved. She did not tear a wrist. That had been true, what she'd told the surgeon she'd been ready to days ago and hadn't, because a torn wrist bought her the ward and nothing past it. But she had 4 days of station geography now, and she knew the corridor, and she knew that 8 meters ahead the daylight came down through a maintenance gap in the domework, an access throat the gray cast used and the scholars didn't, and she had watched a crew go up it on the 2nd day. She didn't need to heal through a wall. She needed 6 people to believe, for 4 seconds, that the thing on the cradle was still a thing. She gave the gray cast his 4 seconds. When his grip left her, she came up off the cradle in one motion, not fast the way a healed body could be fast, but fast the way a patient one could be. The exact motion she'd rehearsed lying still for 4 days, and she was not trying to fight 6 of them and a gray wall of muscle. She was trying to reach a maintenance throat 8 meters away, and everything else. The elbow she drove back into the gray cast's throat membrane. The restraint she tore because tearing it cost her a hand she'd have back in a minute. The surgeon's voice saying her name once. Not an alarm. A question. Everything else was only clearing the 8 meters. She took a shot in the back before she reached it. Some sidearm, some client weapon. A hole punched clean through her below the shoulder blade, and it dropped her to one knee, and it did not stop her, because a hole was a thing her body had learned to consider optional, and she was up and into the throat before the gray cast finished falling, climbing the access ladder into the pale, filtered light with the wound already closing hot and wrong and closing anyway. And behind her, the corridor erupted into the soft, frantic order of people who had been certain, and were suddenly not. Veith did not raise an alarm for a full 4 seconds. He would examine those 4 seconds for a long time after. A gray enforcer choking on a crushed throat membrane, a cradle empty, a specimen worth the whole ward's history vanishing up a maintenance throat with a weapon wound closing in her back, and the first surgeon of the Ashit Reach had stood in the daylight and watched, because some part of him, the surgeon's part, the part that had cut her 9 times to learn a number, had wanted to see it. Had wanted to see the thing she'd promised the Prime, that she'd learn the building faster than they could hold it. She had. In 4 days she had learned it well enough to leave, and the leaving was so precise, so unwasteful, so exactly the length of what she needed and not one motion more, that Veith stood in his own corridor and felt the cold admiration of one craftsman watching another do clean work. Then he raised the alarm because he was still, whatever else he was becoming, an officer of the weave. The station went a full seal. Veith stood over the choking gray enforcer and did the small competent things, clamped the membrane, called the medics, gave the orders that stopped one death, and while his hands worked his mind ran the geometry of the station and arrived, coldly, at the truth that they were not going to catch her by sealing doors. She healed. A sealed station was a set of doors, and behind every door was a gray enforcer certain his weapon meant something. And she had just shown them all, in 8 meters of corridor, exactly what their certainty was worth. The Prime found him there. Ithuan came at the pace of the very old and the very sure, and she looked at the empty cradle and the choking enforcer and the maintenance throat standing open in the domework. And she did not, Veith noted, look surprised. She looked like a scholar whose experiment had produced the results she'd feared and half expected. "It told me it would learn the building," the Prime said. "I logged that as the animal talking too much." It wasn't talking too much. No, Ithuan's worn cast marks were unreadable in the flat daylight. Seal the reach, not the station, the reach, every throat, every port, the ground below and the dome above. She heals. She does not fly, you told me that yourself, and there is nowhere on this world she can go that is not ours. The Prime turned her 4 thin arms in the gesture that meant a decision had closed. And Veith, you will find her. You made the thing. You will be the one to put it back in a box or end it. If the Weave learns that a first surgeon grafted its most guarded gift into a grade 9 terminal animal and then let the animal walk out of his ward, it will not be the animal they seal. She left. Veith stood in the emptying corridor with the daylight pouring down and the alarm running its soft, frantic order through the station, and he understood that the Prime had just told him the truth of his own position with the same flat accuracy the human used. He had built this, and now it was loose, and the only way back to standing was to catch a thing that could not be leashed, could not be sedated, could not be reliably killed, and had spent 4 days learning him personally. Up in the domework, in the pale, filtered light, Marakel had already gone still again. She'd climbed until the throat opened onto a service gallery that ran the inner curve of the dome, a cold, high catwalk of gray plate and daylight, and she'd put her back to a stanchion and pressed her palm flat over the closing wound in her chest and made herself breathe slow while her body did the arithmetic. The hole was shrinking. It hurt in the specific bright way it always hurt, the wrongness of flesh moving that wasn't supposed to move, and she rode it the way she'd learned to ride it, the way she'd ridden the cracked wrist in the holding cell and the killing thigh wound on the cradle. You did not fight the pain and you did not pretend it wasn't there. You put it in a room and you shut the door and you kept counting. Below her the station sealed itself, throat by throat, and Mara counted the seals closing the same way she'd counted them opening, and understood that she'd traded one box for a larger one and was not troubled by it. A larger box had more parts. She had healed from a weapon meant to end her. She had cost them their certainty. She was loose in the high cold daylight of a station that had been sure, an hour ago, that a thing on a cradle stayed a thing on a cradle. That was enough for 1 day's work. She thought about the surgeon watching her go and not raising the alarm for 4 seconds, and she filed it, the way she filed everything, on the tray in her head where she kept the parts that moved. Veith went up into the domework alone, against the Prime's order and his own sense, because he had understood something in the corridor that the gray casts never would. They were hunting her as prey. They had flooded the reach with enforcers and sealed the throats and set the gauge readers to sweep for the bright anomaly of her healing, and they were doing all of it in the certainty that a cornered animal ran or hid. Veith had watched her leave. She had not run and she had not hidden. She had moved exactly as far as she needed and then gone still, and he was the only one in the station who had grasped that stillness was her weapon, that the human did her fighting by waiting until the thing hunting her showed her a part that moved. So he did not sweep for her. He climbed to the high service gallery where the gauge had lost her in the dome's cold interference, and he stood in the pale, filtered daylight with his 4 hands open and empty and said, into the ringing quiet of the catwalks, "Marakel, it's the surgeon. I came up without the enforcers, and I came up without a weapon, and if you were going to kill me for what I did to you, you'd have done it in the corridor when my back was turned. So I think we can talk." Silence and the vast pale sky pouring through the dome, and the small sounds of a station hunting the wrong way for a thing that wasn't running. "You came up without a weapon," her voice said, from somewhere above and behind him, unhurried, "because you finally worked out that a weapon doesn't mean anything to me. Don't dress it up as trust. It was arithmetic. You're getting better at my arithmetic. That's the only reason I haven't moved." He turned slowly. She was above him on a cross strut, folded small into the shadow of a stanchion, and even now, loose and hunted in the high cold light, she held the same stillness she'd held on the cradle. Her flight suit was dark with old blood over a chest that no longer had a wound in it. She was watching him with the flat total attention, and he understood that he was still being taken apart. "I want to understand what I made," Veith said. "That's all it's ever been for me. The Prime wants an asset. The enforcers want to kill. I want to understand it, and you are the only one in this station who understands it better than I do, so I'm asking you plainly, what did your body do with my gift?" Mara was quiet a moment. Then in the accounting voice, the voice that said aloud what both of them could see, "You built a thing that heals a little slowly, and you built a leash so it'd only ever heal as much as you allowed. Two halves, the healing and the leash." She shifted in the shadow. "My cells looked at the healing and copied it. Not once. Past counting, you said, and you were right. That's the only true thing you've written down all week. And when a thing gets copied that many times inside a body like mine, the leash doesn't get copied with it. The leash was one careful sentence. My body doesn't do one careful sentence. It does everything loud all at once, 1,000,000 times over, and your careful sentence drowned in the flood the second there was a flood." She tilted her head. "You didn't give me your gift, surgeon. You gave me a seed and my ground grew it into something your ground never could. That's not me being special. That's my whole world. Everything that lives where I'm from outgrows the thing killing it or it doesn't live. You reached down a very deep well, and you were surprised by what was at the bottom." Veith stood in the daylight and felt the last of his doctrine come apart in a way that was almost a relief. The way a held breath is a relief when it finally goes. "The Prime thinks the range does this," he said. "That any human, given the renewal, becomes what you are." "The Prime's right." Mara said it without weight, the way she said the largest things. "That's the part that's got her measuring me for a box at your core. It's not one animal that got off the cradle. It's a sample. She's worked out that if she can't hold me, she can't hold the idea of me, and the idea of me is already loose the second one of your surgeons wrote it down." Her flat eyes found his. "You wrote it down, Veith. 5 days of numbers. The idea of me is in your ward's log with your seal on it. That's why she told you to catch me or be sealed with me. It was never really about the animal. It's about the thing the animal proved." He had not said that to her. She had assembled it from 4 days of watching him stand at a cradle. Veith felt the cold admiration again and did not fight it this time. "Then help me," he said. "Not the weave, me. Come down off the strut and let me get you off this reach before the Prime does the thing she's going to do, because I know her 200 seasons and I know what she does when she decides a thing can't be held. She stops trying to hold it. She burns the shelf so no one can draw from it again." Mara went very still, and it was a different stillness than her others, the stillness of a person who has just heard a fact drop into place. "Say that again," she said, "the thing she does. If she cannot hold you and she cannot hold the idea of you, she will make sure the idea dies here, not just you. The evidence, the log, the ward, the 3 humans of your convoy, she'll have already ordered the other 2 records expended, and she'll take this whole reach to slag before she lets the weave learn that a grade 9 range broke the renewal, because a leash that can be broken isn't a leash, and the leash is the only thing that has ever let my people sleep next to their clients." Veith heard himself saying it and understood saying it, that it was true, that he had known it was true since the Prime put her thin hand to the wall on the third day. She'll call it a containment. She'll be very calm, and everyone on this reach who saw what you are, including me, will be part of what gets contained. For the first time since he had opened her arm, Mara Kell looked at something other than him. She looked out through the dome at the vast pale sky, the sky of a world she'd never touch, and Veith realized he was watching her do the thing she did, take a station apart into parts, but larger now, take a whole reach apart and find, somewhere in it, the part that moved. "How long," she said, "before she gives the order?" "She'll have given it when the sweep fails. The sweep is failing now." He looked up at her, small in the cold light. "Hours, maybe less." Mara came down off the strut. She did it slowly, without threat, and she came to stand in front of the surgeon who had cut her 9 times, close enough that he could see the fine map of her human scars had come back. Every one of them, the record of a hard life on a hard world, restored by a body that healed everything except, it seemed, its own history. "Here's the arithmetic, then," she said, in the low, even voice, and Veith leaned in to hear it, because he had learned in 5 days that when this small human lowered her voice it was because she was about to hand you the part that moved. "You want to understand what you made. She wants it dead. The enforcers want it dead. And I want off this reach, and I want the other 2 records of my people out with me, because the Prime's right that we're a sample, and a sample she burns is a sample nobody back home ever knows was worth burning." She looked up at him. "You're the only Cytherea in this station who wants the thing I am to keep existing. That makes you the part that moves. So the question isn't whether you help me, surgeon. You already have. You came up here without a weapon and told me what your Prime is going to do. The question is whether you understood, while you were doing it, that you'd already crossed her." Veith stood in the daylight with the alarm running below and the sky pouring down and the small human watching him receive the truth, and he understood that she was right, that he had crossed the Prime the moment he climbed the throat alone, and that he had known it and climbed anyway, because 5 days of numbers had taught the surgeon in him, a thing the officer in him was only now catching up to, that the most valuable specimen he had ever held was not the human's body. It was the human. The containment order came down while they were still in the dome work, and it came, as Veith had promised, very calmly. He heard it through his own officer's channel, the Prime's worn voice reading the words the doctrine kept for exactly this: a reach declared unrecoverable, a Cytherea withdrawal to the core, a scuttling of the ward and the labs and the holding blocks and everything the ward had ever logged. She did not say the human's name. She did not have to. She called it a biological containment failure of the highest grade, and she set a countdown against the withdrawal. And Veith, listening, translated it out of doctrine and into the plain fact underneath. In something under 6 hours the Oshit reach, and everyone the weave was willing to lose on it would be reduced to slag under a bright daytime sky, and the idea of a human that broke the renewal would go into the slag with it. "She started," he said. "I heard the shape of it in your face." Mara was already moving along the gallery, low and fast and economical, and she'd worked out the direction before he'd said a word, down and inward, toward the station's held heart, not out toward the ports. "Wrong way," she said when he moved to correct her. "Ports come after." "The ports come first. It's the only way off the reach, and it's the thing she'll seal last, because her own people leave through it." "The ports come after," Mara said again without heat, and the flatness of it stopped him. "You said holding blocks, in the order. Scuttling the holding blocks." She looked back at him, and for the first time in 5 days there was something in her flat face that he could name, and it was not fear and it was not fury. It was a decision that had already closed, the way the Prime's decisions closed. "How many of my convoy did you take alive?" Veith did not want to answer, and answered because he had learned that lying to her cost more than the truth. "Your survey convoy was 19. 3 came to the trials. The rest went to labor holding the general block, gray cast stock, unaugmented. 14. They'll be in the scuttling, manifest as inventory. 14. Mara said the number once quietly and put it somewhere, and Veith watched her do the thing again, take the whole burning reach apart into parts, except that now the arithmetic had 14 new terms in it and she did not, he saw, intend to leave a single one out of the sum. Then the ports come after, she said, because I'm not getting on anything that leaves without them, and neither are you, because you're the only Setheri on this reach who can open a labor block without an enforcer detail, and you know it, and that's why you're still following me instead of running for a courier of your own. It was true. He had known it was true since the gallery. He had climbed the throat a surgeon curious about his specimen, and somewhere in the last hour he had become a man walking into the burning heart of his own station to open cages for a species he had spent 5 days cutting, and the terrible clean thing about it was that he could not point to the moment he decided. There had been no moment. There had only been the small human saying aloud, one by one, the things that were true, until the sum of them left him nowhere to stand but beside her. They went down. The station below the dome was already emptying. The soft, frantic order of a withdrawal, Setheri scholars and gray enforcers streaming the other way toward the corside ports, and in the emptying corridors the two of them moved against the current, a first surgeon of the weave and a small blood-stained death-world human. And no one stopped them, because a surgeon walking a restrained specimen deeper into a scuttling station was exactly the kind of thing a surgeon of the weave might be doing. And Veith had spent 200 seasons being precisely the sort of authority no one questioned. Mara walked at his side with her wrists loosely crossed as though bound, playing the thing on the cradle one more time, and it bought them 4 seals and a transit spine before it stopped working. It stopped working at the labor block, where the gray cast chief was waiting, because the gray cast chief was the one enforcer on the reach who had already learned, in a corridor, what the thing on the cradle was worth. His nameplate read Ossenwarden Drut. His throat membrane was still bandaged from the corridor, the ugly clampwork of the medics who'd saved him, and he stood in the mouth of the labor block with a heavy weapon and 6 enforcers, and the particular stillness of a creature that has been made a fool of once, and does not intend to survive being made a fool of twice. First surgeon, Drut said in his bad trade cant, not lowering the weapon. The manifest doesn't move the specimen inward. The manifest scuttles it in place. His small, hard eyes went to Mara. Both of you stand away from the block. Stand down, Ossenwarden. This is a first surgeon's business. It was a first surgeon's business, Drut said, until the first surgeon's business put its elbow through my throat. He shifted the weapon. The Prime's channel says contain, not preserve. I've got standing to end it right here, and after the corridor I've got the appetite. He looked at the human, and Veith saw the enforcer make the mistake that everyone on the reach kept making, the one the doctrine trained into them. He looked at a small still thing and read it as cornered. Nothing to say, animal. On the cradle you couldn't stop talking. You should open the block, Mara said, flat, unhurried, accounting. 14 of my people are behind that door, and your Prime's going to slag them in 5 hours as inventory. And you're going to open the door because, in about 10 seconds you're going to understand that your weapon doesn't end this. It just makes it take longer. And you've already learned once today how much you hate learning that in front of your detail. Drut fired. He fired to end it, a clean shot, center of the small chest, the shot that ended any animal alive, and Mara took it standing, the way she'd taken the one in the corridor, and it drove her back a step into the wall and it did not put her down. She stood in the bright transit light with a killing hole through her and her body already hauling it closed, hot and wrong and closing, and she looked at the gray-cast chief with the flat total attention, and she said through it, in a voice gone rough with the specific cost of what her flesh was doing, "There. Now your detail's seen it too." And that was the thing Veith carried out of the labor block, longer than the numbers, longer than the corridor. Not that she healed. He had 6 days of her healing. It was that she paid for it in front of them. Her people's whole miracle was not that the fire cost nothing. It cost, He could see it costing. The wound closing left her gray and swaying, her breath sawing, sweat standing on her human skin, the body running its impossible arithmetic and charging her body for every term of it. It cost, and she paid it standing, without a sound past the rough accounting voice. And she did not fall, and the 6 enforcers who had come to end a thing on a cradle watched a small death-world animal be shot through the heart and answer by telling them evenly that they should have brought a plan instead of a weapon. The detail's certainty went out of them. Veith watched it go, watched 6 gray enforcers who had never in their lives doubted that a weapon meant an ending stand in the transit light and doubt it, all at once, and take, without an order, a step back. Asenward and Drut did not step back. He was the one who'd been made a fool of in the corridor, and he raised the weapon again, and Mara, gray, swaying, a hole still knitting in her chest, moved off the wall toward him unhurried, and said the last thing before it turned, and the last thing was not a threat. "You don't have to die for her manifest," she said. "None of you do. Open the door and walk to your courier. I'm not here for you. I've got 14 people in 5 hours, and I don't have 1 second to spend on killing a gray caste chief who was only ever following an order. So open the door, Drut. Let me spend my seconds where they count." It was, Veith understood, the coldest mercy he had ever seen offered, and it was offered by a bleeding animal to the creature that had just shot her through the heart, and it was not weakness. It was arithmetic. She did not have a second to spend on hate, so she did not spend it, and the not spending was more frightening to the 6 enforcers than any fury could have been, because a thing that could hate you and simply chose not to bother had already decided you did not matter enough to break. Asenward and Drut opened the door. He did it slowly, without lowering the weapon all the way, a gray caste chief keeping the last of his standing while surrendering the rest of it, and Veith understood that the human had given him exactly that, a way to open the block that was not the same as being beaten, a door he could tell himself he'd chosen. Mercy, that was also arithmetic. She'd spent no seconds on his pride and left him enough of it to move. Behind the door were the 14. They were in a bad way. A labor block was not a ward. It was a stock pen, and the humans of the survey convoy had been kept as inventory, unfed past use, marked at the wrist with the gray caste's branding. They came up off the floor when the door opened, and Veith braced for the noise, the panic, the flat terror he'd catalogued in every client species that ever saw a Sethiri fill a doorway. It did not come. 14 human faces turned to the door and found the small blood-stained woman standing in it, and what went through the block was not panic. It was recognition, and under the recognition, something settling into place, the way a detail settles when its officer walks in. "Kel," one of them said, an older man, convoy insignia still on his collar, a broad hand pressed to a wound at his side. "They said you were expended." "Intake said all 3 of you." Intake was wrong about a lot of things this week. Mara was already moving through them, and Veith watched her do to the block what she'd done to the station, take it apart into parts, count the wounded, count the walking, count the ones who'd need carrying, and sum it without a wasted motion. "We've got 5 hours and a scuttling order and 1 Sethiri surgeon who's decided to be useful. Anybody who can walk, walk. Anybody who can carry, carry. We're not leaving one." She looked back at the older man. "How many can't stand, Akefur?" 3. Maybe 4. "Then we carry 4. She said it the way she said everything, flat, closed, and Veith understood that the 14 had just heard the thing the 6 enforcers had heard, the thing that was more frightening than fury, total certainty, running cold with no room in it for the possibility of leaving anyone behind. It was not a rallying cry. She did not raise her voice. She simply stated the sum, and the sum had no term in it for loss, and the block believed her the way you believe arithmetic. They moved. It should not have worked. A first surgeon, a bleeding augmented human, and 14 wounded death-world animals against a scuttling station, and a withdrawal in full flood, and it worked for a while, because a station emptying itself in an orderly panic is a station full of exactly the sort of gaps a person who takes buildings apart for a living can move through. Mara took point and Veith took the seals, his palms still authority enough to cycle a door in a withdrawal. And Akefer and the walking wounded carried the four who couldn't stand, and they went outward through the transit spine toward the Reach's ports under the pouring pale daylight of the great dome, and every seal Veith opened was one more not entirely true thing, one more crossing of the Prime, until the crossings were the only ground he had left to stand on. The Prime was waiting at the last spine junction before the ports. Ithuan had not come with enforcers. She had come the way she did everything, alone and precise and unhurried, and she stood in the wide, bright junction with the daylight on her worn cast marks, and watched the strange procession come toward her. Her first surgeon, the specimen that broke the renewal, and 14 brand-marked animals off her own manifest. And she did not reach for a weapon, because the prime adept of the Ashet Reach had never once in 200 seasons believed that a weapon was the strongest thing in a room. "Veith," she said, "stop there." He stopped. Mara did not stop, but she went still at his shoulder, which was its own kind of stopping, and the 14 gathered behind them in the bright junction, and for a moment the only sound was the far soft roar of the withdrawal and the countdown running under everything. "I authorized the human trials," Ithuan said to Veith, as though the two of them were alone, over the soft adepts, on the argument that a grade range that could be made to serve was worth the risk of finding one that couldn't. "I made that argument for 200 seasons of standing, and I made it because I believed the leash held. The leash is the whole of us, Veith. It is the reason a small, careful people who mend slowly have slept 9,000 seasons beside the larger, fiercer things they leashed. Take the leash away, and we are exactly what we have always secretly been, the smallest thing in every room we have ever ruled." Her worn eyes moved, for the first time, to Mara Kell. "You want to carry it home, the idea of it, a range that takes our gift and makes it a thing without a leash. You understand what that does to us." "I understand what it does to you," Mara said. "It ends the part where you sleep next to things you own. That's not the same as ending you." She said it without weight, the accounting voice, and Veith heard the whole ideological floor of his civilization named and answered in 19 flat words. "You could have kept your gift. Nobody made you reach down a grade 9 well and pull up a leash to sell. You did that. And now the well knows the shape of the thing you kept for yourselves, and you can't unknow it back into us, so you want to burn the reach and call it containment and tell the weave the well was always empty." She shifted her weight, gray and steady. "It won't be empty. I'm standing in it. And in 5 hours, when your countdown runs, I'm either off this reach or I'm not, but the idea of me left the second your surgeon wrote his first number down. You've already lost the leash, Prime. You're just deciding now how many of your own people you burn pretending you haven't." The Prime was silent for a long moment, and Veith watched 200 seasons of certainty meet the small flat truth, and have no doctrine to answer it with. "Veith," Ithuan said at last, not looking at him. "Come to the core with me. Leave the specimen and its inventory to the countdown. There is a version of this where a first surgeon made an error in a ward and the error was contained, and the surgeon went on to 200 more seasons of standing. I am offering you that version. It closes when you take one more step toward that port." And there it was, the last door, offered plainly, and Veith stood in the pouring daylight between the oldest authority he had ever known and the smallest, and understood that the Prime had read him correctly in every way but one. She thought he was still choosing whether to cross her. He had crossed her in the domework hours ago, and every seal since had only been the crossing catching up to itself, and the thing the Prime called an error he had come, in 6 days, to call the only true thing he had ever done. Because a surgeon who spends his life learning more than the thing on his table, and then meets the one thing on the table that learns him back, does not get to go on pretending the table is the same. "I made it," Veith said. "You said so yourself, Prime. I made the thing, and I will be the one to see it through, and seeing it through does not mean back to the core." He turned deliberately and put himself at the human's shoulder on the port side of the junction, on the wrong side of 200 seasons. It means the ports. The Prime did not try to stop them at the junction. She stepped aside, precise and unhurried, and let the strange procession pass toward the ports, and it was Mara, not Veith, who had known the old adept 200 seasons, who understood what stepping aside meant. "She's not letting us go," Mara said low, as they cleared the junction into the long, bright approach to the port ring. "She's letting us get where she wants us. She wants the sample on a ship. She wants you contained. A ship is the opposite of contained. A ship is a box she can slag clean, all at once, with nothing left to study and nobody left to say what was in it." Mara's flat eyes were moving over the port ring ahead, taking it apart, and Veith followed her gaze and saw what she'd already seen, that the couriers were nearly all gone, the withdrawal in its last flood, and that the two ships still at the ring were held, not boarding, their ramps down and waiting. Held. "She doesn't want us dead in a corridor where the weave might dig us out of the slag and ask questions. She wants us aboard, buttoned up, clear of the reach. And then she wants one clean containment burst that takes the ship and calls it an accident of the scuttling. That's why she stepped aside. We're walking to the one box she's sure of." Veith ran it against 200 seasons of Ithuan and found it exact. It was precisely the move the Prime would make. Not the crude ending of an enforcer's weapon, but the clean, deniable, total kind. The kind that left the weave a tidy record and no awkward sample. "Then we don't take the ship she's holding for us." "We take one of them," Mara said. "We just don't let her hold it." She looked at him, gray and steady, the wound in her chest long closed but the cost of it still on her in the sawing edge of her breath, the grayness under her skin. "You said the scuttle runs from a control point. Where?" "The reach spine has a master seat, core side. She'll trigger the early burst from there or from the core itself once she's aboard her own courier." He said it and heard, saying it, where it went. "You can't reach it. It's the wrong direction, back through the whole withdrawal, and even if you reached it, it's Sethiri work keyed to Sethiri hands. You can't operate it." "No," Mara agreed. "I can't, you can." And there it was, laid on the tray between them, the part that moved. The ship for the 14, the control seat for the surgeon, the two of them pulling in opposite directions across a burning reach because that was the only shape of the thing that got everyone out. Veith stood in the bright port light and understood that the small human had taken apart not just the station but the whole choice, and found in it the one arrangement of parts where the 14 lived, and that the arrangement required him to go back into the reach. The Prime meant to burn and hold her finger off the trigger with his own Sethiri hands. "If I hold the seat," he said slowly, "I don't reach a ship." "No," Mara said again, and did not soften it because she never softened anything, and Veith understood that not softening was its own kind of respect, the only kind she had. "You hold the seat, you hold the reach open long enough for the ship to run, and then the reach burns with you on it. That's the arithmetic. I've run it 4 ways, and that's the only one where 14 people go home." She held his gaze. "I'm not going to pretend it's a different sum, surgeon. You crossed your Prime for this. You should get to see it clean." Veith looked at the small gray human who had told him the truth every day for 6 days because the truth cost her nothing, and found that she was telling it now even though it cost her something, and he understood what the something was. She did not want to spend him. She had 14 and she had 5 hours and she did not have 1 second to spend on hate, and she had, somewhere in 6 days, stopped having a second to spend on his death either. And the flat closed way she said the arithmetic was the closest a thing like her came to grief. "Get them aboard," he said. "I'll hold the seat." They ran the last of the approach under the pouring daylight, and the port ring rose around them, bright and cold and nearly empty, and the two held ships waited with their ramps down like the boxes they were. And it was there in the last 100 meters that Asenward Drut caught up to them, not ahead, blocking, but behind, following, alone. his throat still bandaged and his heavy weapon slung, and his small hard eyes on the small human who had been shot through the heart in front of his detail, and answered by telling him to go home. "Surgeon," Drut called, and his bad trade cant was rougher than before. "The seat's keyed to first cast hands, yours or the Prime's. You go back there alone, you don't come out, and you don't hold it long. The Prime comes down that spine with a detail and takes the seat off you in 100 count." He stopped, 10 meters back, and did the thing Veith had watched the whole Reach fail to do all day. He looked at the small human and did not read her as prey. "I opened a door I wasn't ordered to open. That's already a crossing. The Prime doesn't keep a chief who opens doors." He unslung the heavy weapon, and for a bad moment Veith's 6 days of the Reach told him what came next, and then Drut turned the weapon and set it, butt down, on the deck, like a thing put aside. "So I'll hold the spine behind you while you hold the seat." A gray caste chief and a first surgeon, holding a burning Reach open for 14 animals off my own manifest. Nobody's going to believe it. Doesn't matter. Nobody's going to be left to tell it. Mara looked at the gray caste chief for a long moment, and Veith watched her run him through the same flat accounting she ran everything, and find, evidently, that the sum came out true. "You shot me through the heart 4 hours ago," she said. "You told me to go home," Drut said. "I've got no home to go to. That keeps a chief who opens doors. This is closer." He picked the weapon back up, not aiming it, just carrying it, a tool for the last work. "Go, animal, get them aboard. We'll hold you the count." The countdown ran under everything, and the daylight poured pale and enormous through the dome, and Mara Kell turned to the two who had crossed for her, the surgeon who made her and the chief who shot her, and did not thank them, because thanks was a second she didn't have, and instead did the only thing that was worth doing with the second she had, which was to get 14 wounded Deathworld humans up a ramp and into a box and clear of the shelf the Weave had decided to burn. Veith went back into the Reach the way you go back into a thing you have decided to lose, which is to say, without hurry and without looking at the ports again, because looking at the ports would cost him the steadiness he needed for the seat. Drut came at his shoulder as far as the spine mouth, and there the gray caste chief stopped and set himself in the wide, bright throat of the corridor with the heavy weapon across his plated chest, a squat, immovable fact between the port ring and everything the Prime would send down the spine to take the seat back. "100 count, surgeon," Drut said, not looking at him, already watching the far end of the corridor. "Maybe more if they come careful. Don't spend it slow." Veith left him there and went on alone, deeper, against the last thin current of the withdrawal, into the cold, clean heart of the station. He had served 200 seasons, and was now going to hold open until it killed him. The master seat sat in a domed chamber at the spine's core, and the daylight came down into it too. That was the thing Veith would hold onto at the end, that even here, even in the black heart of a scuttling Reach, the world's pale, enormous sky poured through the domework and lit the chamber bright and even, so that the last work of his life was done not in shadow but in a flat, clean daylight that hid nothing. He crossed to the seat. He put his 4 hands to the Setheri controls that no gray caste and no human could operate, and he found the containment sequence already staged, already counting, the Prime's clean deniable burst armed and waiting on a trigger, and he did the one thing a first cast hand could do that no one else on the Reach could. He took hold of the sequence and he held it open. Not disarmed, he could not disarm it. It was the Prime's authority, and it answered her hand over his, but held, stalled, the burst leashed by a surgeon's grip, the way a surgeon's grip had once leashed everything, and every second he held it was a second the ship at the ring could use. Far off, through the spine, he heard Drut's weapon speak, once, and then the soft, frantic order of a detail meeting an immovable gray fact in a corridor. Aboard the med courier, Mara Kell was doing the arithmetic of 14 wounded, and a ship she'd never flown. She could not fly it. That was a term she'd carried from the start. She healed. She did not pilot Setheri hulls, and so the ship was one more building to take apart into parts, and she took it apart the way she took everything apart, fast and cold and without a wasted motion, and found the part that moved. A med-courier ran itself, was built to, a hull for moving wounded stock between wards without a scholar aboard to tend them, and it would run a filed course on a single keyed command. It needed one Cytherea authorization to release the ring clamp, and Veith had given her that before he went back, a keyed token pressed into her human hand, the last not entirely true thing he would ever enter into a weave system. A med-courier released on a first surgeon's authority, carrying inventory that was not on any manifest, out into a sky the Prime meant to keep clean. "Akaffer," she said, into the hold, where the 14 were belting the 4 who couldn't stand into the med-cradles built for gray-cast bodies and too large for human ones. "Course is filed, clamps on a token. The second I key it we're committed, no waiting, no second pass, whatever's not aboard stays on the reach." She looked back through the hold at the faces, brand-marked, half-starved, watching her with the settled attention of a detail that had found its officer. "Everybody's aboard, so it keys when the reach opens, and not before, because we've got 2 of theirs holding it open, and I'm not spending their seconds sitting on a clamp." "2 of theirs," Akaffer said. He was old convoy and he'd caught the shape of it. "The surgeon that cut you, and a gray chief." "The surgeon that cut me," Mara agreed flat, "and a gray chief who shot me through the heart." Yes, she did not explain it because there was no second to spend explaining it, and because the explanation was a thing she was only half sure of herself, that somewhere in 6 days the 2 creatures most responsible for the worst of it had become, without her asking, the 2 holding the door. Belt in. When it moves hard. Back at the seat, the Prime came down the spine. She came the way Veith had known she would, past whatever was left of Drut's stand in the corridor, alone again at the last, her worn cast marks catching the daylight as she entered the domed chamber, and found her first surgeon in the master's seat with his 4 hands locked over the containment sequence, holding her clean, deniable burst leashed against her own authority. "You can't disarm it," Ithuan said. She was not out of breath. The very old and the very sure did not run. "It answers my hand. You can only hold it, and you can only hold it as long as you sit there, and the moment your hands leave the seat it goes to its count. You've bought them minutes, Veith. Not a departure. Minutes." "Minutes are what she asked for," Veith said. "She runs everything in the second she has. I'm giving her mine." The Prime crossed to the seat, slow, and stood over him. And for a long moment the 2 oldest authorities on the reach looked at each other across a scuttling sequence in the pouring daylight, and there was no weapon between them because neither had ever believed a weapon was the strongest thing in a room. "I taught you the seat," Ithuan said, 200 seasons ago. "I taught you that a first surgeon holds the reach's life in his hands, and that the holding is a trust, and that the trust is the leash we keep on ourselves, so that our clients can trust the leash we keep on them. You are using the thing I taught you to break the thing I taught you for." Her worn eyes moved over him, and Veith saw in the old face something he had never once seen in 200 seasons. Not anger, not even grief, but a kind of vertigo, the look of a creature watching the floor of its whole certainty tilt. "Tell me why, not the animal's arithmetic. Yours. You are a first surgeon of the weave. Tell me why you are burning with the reach to move 14 brand-marked Deathworld animals off a shelf. We were right to close." And Veith, holding the burst leashed with hands that had cut the small human 9 times to learn a number, gave the Prime the truest answer he had, which was the answer 6 days had taught him. "Because I spent my whole life," he said, "learning more than the thing on my table. And then I put my gift into a thing that learned me back, that lay still, and let me cut it and studied me the entire time, and told me the truth every day because the truth cost it nothing, and worked out the shape of what you'd do to it before you decided to do it. I have leashed 11 client species, Prime. Not one of them ever once looked at me the way she looked at me. Like a problem worth solving, like an equal it hadn't finished." He tightened his grip on the sequence. "You reached down a grade 9 well and pulled up a leash to sell, and you were surprised by what was at the bottom. I went down after it. And what's at the bottom isn't an animal that breaks the renewal. It's a thing that is more like what we pretend to be, precise and patient and merciful because mercy is efficient, than anything we have leashed in 9,000 seasons. I'm not burning to save 14 animals, Prime. I'm burning because I finally met something worth the truth, and the truth is that we were never the surgeons. We were just the ones holding the knife. The Prime did not answer Veith's truth with a truth of her own. She answered it the way the very old and the very sure answer a thing that has cost them their floor. She reached for the one authority left to her that the surgeon's grip could not hold. The seat answers your hands, Ithuan said, only while your hands are first cast and living. There is a second seat, Veith. You know there is. I taught you that too. She was already moving, slow and precise, toward the chamber's inner wall, where a paired control sat recessed under the daylight, the Prime's own override, the hand at the other end of the Reach's leash, the way a counter key sat at the other end of every graft. You can hold the burst against a first surgeon's authority. You cannot hold it against mine. I built the leash on this Reach the way you built the leash on that animal, and I kept the other end. And I am about to do to you exactly what you did to her, reach past your grip with the hand that outranks it. She put her thin fingers to the override. The difference is that my counter key seats. Far down the spine, Drut's weapon had gone silent. Veith felt it in the chamber's quiet. The Grey Chief's stand had ended, the way a stand against a detail always ended, and the corridor between the seat and the ports was open now. And the Prime's fingers were on the override, and the whole clean architecture of the Reach's death was about to seat itself over his surgeon's grip the way a counter key seats over a graft. He held the burst leashed with everything he had, and it was not going to be enough because the Prime was right. She held the longer end, she always had, and the thing about a leash was that the one who held the longer end won. That was the moment Mara Kell came back into the Reach. She came the way she did everything, low and fast and without a wasted motion, back up the spine she had just cleared, over the place where Drut had fallen, the Grey Chief down but not dead, his plated chest heaving, his bad throat worse now, and Mara did not stop, because stopping was a second she'd account for later, and into the domed chamber under the pouring daylight, and she took the whole tableau apart in the half-breath it took to cross the threshold. The surgeon locked over a leashed burst, the old one's fingers reaching for the override that would seat past him, the longer end of the leash about to win. Don't key the override, Mara said flat to the Prime, and the Prime's fingers stopped because even now, even here, a thing that spoke with that much certainty made a body stop and listen. You reach past his grip, the burst seats, the Reach burns, fine. You've been telling him for 200 seasons that the one who holds the longer end wins. She crossed the chamber toward the seat, toward Veith, unhurried, gray and steady, and paying for 6 days of running the fire in every sawing breath. Here's the thing you never had to learn because you always held the longer end. When the leash is about to lose you the thing you're holding, you cut it. You don't win the leash. You end it and you keep the thing. There is no cutting the burst, Ithuan said. It seats or it holds. Those are the terms. I'm not talking about your burst. Mara reached the seat. She put one small human hand on Veith's shoulder, the first time in 6 days she had touched him without his instruments between them, and she looked down at the surgeon who had made her, and she said the thing she had not said aloud at the ports, the term she had carried up the spine, the part that moved. You ran the arithmetic 4 ways, surgeon, and told me the only sum where 14 go home was the one where you burn. You were wrong. There's a 5th way. You just couldn't see it because you still think the thing I am can only heal me. Her flat eyes held his. It doesn't only heal me. You made it. You know what it is. It's a gift your people spent 9,000 seasons learning to give carefully, slowly, one careful sentence at a time with a leash on the other end. She tightened her hand on his shoulder. I don't do one careful sentence. I do everything loud all at once 1,000,000 times over. And there's no leash on my end because your leash drowned in me the first afternoon, so I can give it the way you never could. No key, no counter key, no coming back to me every season to be settled. She said it without weight, the accounting voice, the coldest and largest thing she had said in 6 days. I can give it once and it's yours, and it's past your control the second it takes, because it runs on my ground now, and my ground doesn't ration. Veith understood then what she had come back to do, and the understanding went through him like the cold, clean daylight itself. You'd grafted into me, he said. The renewal multiplied, unleashed. Into you, into the chief bleeding out in the corridor, into anybody on this reach who wants to be a thing the burn can't finish. Mara's hand did not leave his shoulder. You hold the seat till the last second, the burst seats, the reach burns, and you don't die in it, surgeon, because the thing you put in me, I put in you, and it does for you what it does for me, it decides the fire is optional. You made a gift you could only ever give with a leash on it. I'm about to give it to you with no leash at all. She held his gaze. That's the 5th way. You get to see it clean and live anyway. Yes or no. I've got a ship on a clamp and I don't have a second to spend on you deciding slow. Across the chamber, the prime adept of the Ashit reach took her fingers off the override. She did it slowly, and she did it not out of mercy but out of something older and colder. The scholars need to see the end of the experiment, even the experiment that had cost her the floor of her whole world. She looked at the small human offering the weave's most guarded gift, unleashed in a burning chamber to the surgeon who had cut her and the chief who had shot her, offering it the way you'd offer water, casually, without ration, without a key kept back, and Ithuan understood, 200 seasons of certainty tilting all the way over at last, that this was the thing she had been right to fear and wrong to think she could burn. You could slag a sample. You could not slag the fact that a grade 9 range, handed the one power the Sethiri kept for themselves, had multiplied it past all control, and then chosen, first thing, to give it away. Yes, Veith said to the human. Do it. And Mara Kell, small and gray and unhurried, bent over the surgeon in the master's seat, and did the thing the Sethiri had spent 9,000 seasons learning to do slowly, carefully, with a leash, and did it in a burning reach in a breath, with no leash at all. It did not feel the way Veith had spent his career, imagining it felt. He had grafted the renewal into 11 client bodies and watched their faces the whole time, and he had built, out of 11 sets of watching, a picture of the thing from the inside, a slow warmth, doctrine said, a settling, a gratitude. Doctrine was wrong the way doctrine had been wrong about everything for 6 days. What Mara Kell put into him was not a slow warmth. It was a flood arriving. It came into him the way she had described her own ground 100 times without his once believing her, everything, loud all at once, 1,000,000 times over. And there was no settling in it and no gratitude and no leash, only the overwhelming sensation of his own flesh being handed a thing it had never been trusted with and taking it, greedily, the way a dry channel takes a river. It hurt. That was the part doctrine had never told him, because doctrine had never let a Sethiri feel the renewal unleashed. It hurt the way she had hurt. The bright wrong specific pain of tissue asked to do a thing it was not built to do and doing it anyway, and Veith understood, gasping in the master's seat with his 4 hands still locked over the burst, that this was the cost she had been paying in front of them all week without a sound. Not that the fire was free. That she carried the fire and the cost of the fire and stood. Hold the seat, Mara said, close to him, flat and steady. It's taking. You'll feel it try to run and you'll want to stop it. Don't, it doesn't ration. Let it run. You hold the seat till the burst seats, and then it won't matter what the burst does to you. She was already turning away, already back to the arithmetic, already spending the next second where it counted. I'm going for the chief. She went back down the spine to where Drut had fallen, and Veith, holding the burst with hands that had begun at their edges, to feel like a stranger's, stronger, surer, healing the fine old, whereof 200 seasons of surgery he had never thought to notice, watched through the chamber's mouth as the small human knelt over the gray-cast chief who had shot her through the heart, and did for him what she had just done for the surgeon. Drut fought it. At first, a gray cast's flat certainty that a thing done to your body by an animal was a thing to be resisted. And then the flood took him too, and Veith watched the enforcer's ruined throat, the bad clampwork, the membrane the medics had barely saved, close and knit and come back whole and better than whole under the small human's hands, and heard the chief make a sound that was not a word, the sound of a creature feeling, for the first time, its own body decide that damage was optional. On your feet, Drut, Mara said. You held the spine. Now hold it healed. And the gray cast chief got up off the floor of the burning reach with his throat made new and his weapon in his hands, and did not thank her, because he had learned, the way the 14 had learned and the 6 enforcers had learned and the surgeon had learned, that thanks was a second she didn't have and a currency she didn't take. Then Mara came back to the chamber, and she did the last thing, the thing Veith would carry longest of all, longer than the numbers and the corridor and the flood arriving in his flesh. She stopped in front of the prime adept of the Ashit Reach, the old scholar who had authorized her cutting, ordered her voice deadened, meant to slag her clean and call it an accident, and she offered the prime the same gift. You too, Mara said. Flat, unhurried. No heat in it and no forgiveness in it either, because forgiveness was not what it was. It was accounting, cold and total, the same accounting she ran on everything. The reach is going to burn. You built the burn and you can't unbuild it and you know it. So here's the 5th way for you too. Take it and the fire's optional and you walk off this reach the same as us, into a galaxy where the leash is finished and your people have to learn to sleep next to us without one. Or don't take it and burn with the thing you're holding. She held the old one's gaze. I don't have a second to spend hating you, Prime. I've got 14 people and a ship on a clamp. But I've got 1 second for this, because your surgeon crossed everything he was to hold your door open, and I think you should get the same offer he got. Yes or no? The prime adept looked at the small human for a long moment, in the pouring daylight. In the last minutes of the reach she had run for 200 seasons, and Veith watched the oldest authority he had ever known do the arithmetic one final time and arrive, coldly, precisely, at an answer that was entirely her own. No, Ithuan said. She said it without fear, the way she had said every large thing, and she said it looking not at the human but at Veith, because the answer was for him. You asked me why the leash was the whole of us. I'll tell you the rest of it, the part I never taught you, because I never thought a first surgeon would need it. Her worn cast marks caught the light. The leash was never only to hold the clients, it was to hold us. A small careful people who mend slowly, who could never afford to run the fire the way that animal runs it. We built the leash so that we would never have to become the thing that needs no leash. So that we would stay small and careful and afraid and human in the only way we ever managed it, by rationing the one power that could have made us gods and keeping the key and telling ourselves the key was mercy. She stepped back toward the override she had chosen not to key, toward the burn she had chosen not to escape. She's offering me the fire with no leash on it, Veith, and I have spent 200 seasons being the hand that keeps the leash so that no one, not even me, ever finds out what a Sethiri becomes when it stops rationing. I am too old to find out now. Let me burn small. It's the last careful thing I have. Veith held the burst and looked at the old scholar choosing the fire, and understood that she was not wrong, exactly, that she had named a true thing, that a leash is sometimes the shape a fear takes when it has run a civilization for 9,000 seasons, and that the difference between the prime and the small gray human was the whole of the HFY the surgeon had spent 6 days failing to see. The Sethiri had been handed a power and built a leash so they would never have to find out what they'd become without one. The human had been handed the same power, multiplied past all control, and the first thing she'd done with it, the very first thing, was give it away in a burning corridor to the creatures who had wronged her, without a leash, without a key, because she was not afraid of what she'd become. She already knew. She'd known on the cradle. She was a thing from a grade 9 well, and the well had taught her long before the Sethiri ever cut her that the fire is only a monster if you're afraid to carry the cost of it. And she carried the cost and stood, and did not ration, and was not a god. She was just a person who wasn't afraid of the fire. And that, Veith understood at last, holding the burst over a burning reach, was the thing his people had never once been. "Ship's on the clamp," Mara said. "Off the seat, surgeon, now." Veith took his 4 hands off the master controls, and the burst went to its count. He felt it go the way you feel a held thing released, the leash sequence he had strangled with a surgeon's grip for long minutes slipping out from under his fingers all at once, seating itself over the whole reach, the prime's clean, deniable ending finally allowed to arrive. Somewhere below them the reach began to die. It did not die in darkness. That was the thing Veith would carry, the last of the things. The scuttling burst did not bring the black he'd always half imagined for the end of a station, the shadow and the ember glow. It brought light. The reach's spine lit from the core outward in a hard, clean daylight brighter than the dome's, a white expanding roar of it pouring up the corridors, and the smoke it threw was sunlit smoke, lit from within and above, so that the death of the Ashit reach happened in a blaze of pale gold and white under a sky that never once stopped being day. "Move," Mara said, and they moved. They went down the spine into the coming light, the surgeon, the small human, the gray-cast chief, and the fire took them, and it did not finish them. Veith ran through a corridor filling with the white roar and felt his own flesh do the impossible thing, felt the burn take his membrane and his body answer it, close it, run the fire and pay the fire and haul him through, and the pain of it was enormous and specific and optional, exactly as she had promised, the cost carried and the body still moving. He understood, running healed through a thing that should have ended him, what 6 days of watching her had never quite taught, that this was what it was to be from a grade 9 well. Not that nothing hurt you. That everything hurt you and you carried it and you kept going because the alternative had been bred out of your whole world a long time before you were born. Drut ran ahead of them, weapon up out of pure habit though there was nothing left to shoot, his healed throat working, his gray plate blackening and his gray plate holding. A creature that had spent its life certain that a body was a fragile thing to be protected, and was learning, in a burning corridor, that it had been wrong about that the way it had been wrong about the animal on the cradle. Behind them in the dome chamber, the prime adept did not run. Veith looked back once, one look. He allowed himself, at the cost of half a second, and saw Ithuan standing at the override she had chosen not to key, in the pouring daylight and the coming white, small and precise and unafraid, burning small the way she had said she would, keeping the last careful thing she had. She did not look back at him. She was looking at the light, 200 seasons of the hand that held the leash, choosing the fire over a galaxy where the leash was finished, because she was too old to learn what a Sethiri became without 1 and 2 honest to pretend the animal was wrong. Veith turned away and ran, and carried her, too, out of the reach, not her body which stayed, but the shape of what she'd chosen, which he would spend the rest of a long life trying to be worthy of the other side of. They reached the ring with the fire a half corridor behind them. The med-courier was still on the clamp. That was the thing that stopped Veith's healed heart for a beat, that the ship was still there, ramped down, when every term of the arithmetic said it should have run, that Mara Kell had told Akafar to key the token and go, and the ship was still there. And in the ramp's mouth stood the old convoy man, Akafar, one broad hand on the clamp release and the other braced in the hatch, having done the exact thing his officer had ordered him not to do. "You said key it and go," Mara said, flat, crossing the last of the ring toward the ramp, gray and blackened and whole. "I did the sum a different way," Akafar said. He did not move off the clamp. "You said we don't leave one. You said it in the block, standing in the door, bleeding. So we ran your sum, Kell, all 14 of us, and it came out that we don't leave one, including the one who said it." He looked past her at the surgeon and the gray chief coming healed out of the fire, and his hard old face did a thing Veith had no Sethiri name for. Didn't expect the sum to grow too theory, mind. We'll argue about that later. Get aboard. The ring's going. The ring was going. The fire came up the last corridor into the port, and the daylight and the white roar met over the ramp, and Mara Kell got the surgeon and the gray cast chief up the ramp ahead of her, because she did not go through a door before the people she was pulling through it. That was a term she'd carried since the labor block, and came up last, and hit the clamp release herself as she cleared the hatch, and the med courier tore off the ring on its filed course as the ring behind it went white. Inside the hold, 14 humans and 2 Setheri and 1 small gray woman rode the launch hard, and through the courier's ports the Ashet Reach fell away beneath them. A station dying in a blaze of sunlit gold and white under an enormous pale sky, the daylight never breaking, the smoke never darkening, a whole shelf of the weave certainty burning bright as noon so that no one would ever be able to draw from it again. Veeth watched it fall away with a body that had just walked out of a fire, and he understood that the Prime had gotten the thing she wanted and the thing she feared in the same stroke. The sample was not in the slag. The sample was in the courier, climbing into the pale sky, 14 brand-marked humans, 1 small gray woman who ran the fire and did not ration it, and 2 Setheri carrying in their healed flesh the unleashed gift that their own people had burned a Reach to keep secret. Ithuan had slagged the Reach clean, and it had bought her nothing, because the idea had never been in the Reach. The idea was in the small human who had told her so on the 3rd day, flat and unhurried, and been logged as talking too much. "Course is filed for the Ashet Verge," Akafar said into the hold as the courier steadied, "and past it if this thing's got the legs for home." He looked at Mara. "Does it have the legs, Kell?" Mara Kell sat in the hold of a stolen Setheri courier with 14 of her people around her, and 2 of her maker's kind healed beside her, gray and blackened and whole, paying still, in every sawing breath, the cost of the fire she carried and never once mentioned. And she looked at the old convoy man and said the first thing in 6 days that was not pure arithmetic. "It has the legs," she said. "We're going home." The cost came for Mara Kell an hour out from the dying Reach, in the quiet of the hold, the way it always came for her, late and all at once, and without a sound. Veeth saw it before the humans did, because he was the only one aboard who had spent 6 days learning to read her. He watched the gray come up under her skin past the point where the fire should have cleared it, watched her sawing breath go ragged and then shallow, watched the small, still body that had walked out of a scuttling Reach finally present the bill for everything it had done since the corridor. The weapon wounds, the killing thigh, the burn, and the 2 graftings, the 2 great unleashed gifts she had poured out of her own ground into a surgeon and a chief without once counting what pouring them cost her. She had run the fire for 6 days and paid for the fire for 6 days and given the fire away twice, and now, an hour from home course, the accounting closed, and Mara Kell slid sideways off the hold bench with her eyes rolling white. "Kell," Akafar was there before Veeth could move, his broad hands catching her, and the 14 came up off their cradles in the settled fast way of a detail whose officer has fallen. "Kell, no, not now, not after all of it." "Let me," Veeth said, and the hold went still, 14 human faces turning to the Setheri surgeon who had cut her, and Veeth understood the whole weight of what he was asking and asked it anyway. "I made the thing that's killing her. I'm the only one aboard who knows what it's doing. Let me." Akafar looked at him for a long, hard moment, the old convoy man weighing a Setheri's 4 hands against his officer's life, and then he laid Mara Kell down on the hold bench and stepped back, because a good detail knows when to hand its officer to the one who can save her. Veeth put his healed hands to the small human and did, for the first time in 6 days, the thing he had trained 200 seasons to do, not to cut her, not to measure her, but to tend her. And what he found, tending her, was the last piece of the thing, the piece that turned the whole 6 days over one final time and showed him its underside. She was not dying of the fire, she was dying of the ration. Her body had run the renewal past all counting, unleashed for 6 days, and unleashed, ungoverned. It had never once let her rest, never once banked the fire because there was no leash in her to bank it. She had given her makers a gift they could only give with a key precisely because the key was also a break, a way to say enough, and she had no enough. And the no enough that made her unkillable was the same no enough that was, now, in the quiet after the running, burning her down to nothing, because it did not know how to stop. The Sethiri had rationed the renewal for 9,000 seasons out of fear. And here, on a hold bench, an hour from home, Veith understood the true shape of that fear at last. Not that the fire would make them gods, but that the fire, unrationed, would ask everything always and never once say enough. And that a body had to be from a grade 9 well, had to have been forged by a whole world that asked everything always, to carry a fire like that and live. She was living, barely, and Veith, tending her, understood that he could give her the one thing her own unleashed fire never could. She needs a leash, he said to the hold. Not to hold her, to let her rest. The thing that makes her unkillable is the thing that won't let her stop, and she's been running it without a break for 6 days, and it's asking more than even she can pay. He looked up at Akafar. I can give her a break, a small one, enough to let the fire bank when there's nothing to heal, so it stops eating her in the quiet. It's the one piece of my craft that's worth anything to you. The weave built the whole leash to control its clients. I can build one thread of it just for her, just to let her sleep. He held the old man's gaze. She won't like it. She'll call it a leash and she'll be right. But it's the difference between a thing that heals from anything and burns out at 30, and a thing that heals from anything and grows old. Let me give her the break. Akafar looked down at the small gray woman who had never once, in the worst week of any of their lives, let herself be given anything. Ask her, Akafar said. When she wakes, don't do it to her sleeping. She's had enough done to her sleeping. He looked at Veith, and the hard old face did the thing again, the thing without a Sethiri name. But have it ready, surgeon. Have it ready for when she says yes. Because she'll say no first, and then she'll do the arithmetic, and then she'll say yes, and when she does, I don't want you fumbling for it. So Veith made it ready. He sat by the hold bench through the long quiet of the flight, and built, out of the ruins of the leash his people had used to enslave 11 species, a single thread of a break for the one human who had broken the leash entirely, not to hold her, not to own her, not with any key kept back in his own hand, but as the thing it should have been all along, the thing the Prime had called mercy and never once meant, a way to say enough that belonged to the one it was given to. And while he built it, he understood the reveal that the small human had been carrying since the 3rd day, the thing she had told the Prime flat and unhurried and been logged for talking too much. The gift was loose, not the sample, the gift. It was in her, unleashed, and it was in him now and in Drut, and it was a thing her ground grew, which meant it was a thing every human ground grew, which meant that the 14 brand-marked survey humans in this hold, and the world they were flying home to, and the whole grade 9 range the weave had spent 9,000 seasons drawing clients from the wrong shelf beside. All of it now could be handed the thing the Sethiri had burned a reach to keep secret, and would multiply it past all control, and would carry the cost of it because a grade 9 well breeds nothing that can't. The weave would come. Of course the weave would come. A leash that can be broken is no leash, and a people whose whole piece rested on the leash would have to answer a range that had broken it. But they would come to a shelf that had learned to heal from anything, and they would find, Veith knew, exactly what he had found in his ward 6 days ago. A small still thing that studied you the whole time you cut it, and worked out the shape of what you'd do before you decided to do it, and told you the truth because the truth cost it nothing. And the truth was the thing Mara Kell had done first, before she ran, before she healed, before she carried 14 out of a burning reach. The truth was that the very first thing a grade 9 range did with the ungoverned power to knit its own flesh was not to make a weapon of it. It was to give it away in a burning corridor to the 2 creatures who had wronged her most, and then to ask, flat and unhurried, whether the old scholar who'd meant to slag her wanted it too. That was the sample the weave should have feared, not the healing, the mercy, a thing that could not be killed, choosing first thing not to kill. Marrakel woke on the hold bench in the deep quiet of the flight with the surgeon sitting beside her, and the first thing she did, before she was fully back, before her eyes had finished tracking the light, was take the situation apart into parts. "You tended me," she said. Her voice was a rasp, the fire's cost still on it. "You didn't cut me and you didn't measure me. You tended me, that's new." She lay still and let the pieces fall into place. "And you built something while I was under. I can see it on the tray beside you. It's small and it's ethereal and it's got that careful shape all your work has." Her flat eyes found his. "It's a leash." "It's a break," Veith said. "One thread. Yours to hold, no key kept back, no coming to me to be settled. I made it so you can rest." He did not soften it because he had learned that softening a thing to her was a kind of lie, and she took lies apart faster than anything. You run the fire and there's no enough in you, and the no enough is going to burn you down to nothing in the quiet between the fights. It's already started. You slid off this bench an hour ago with your eyes gone white. That's the fire eating you because it doesn't know how to stop, and I can give it a way to stop that belongs to you and only you. He met her gaze. "You'll call it a leash. You'll be right. It is one. It's the first honest one my people ever made because it's the only one we ever built to set a thing free instead of hold it." Marrakel looked at the small, careful thread of Sethiri work on the tray, and Veith watched her do the thing Akafar had promised she would do. Say no first, in the whole cold set of her, the reflex of a creature from a world where anything you let be done to you was a thing that could be used to own you. "No," she said. "I know," Veith said. "Do the arithmetic." And she did. He watched her do it, watched the small, still face run the sum the way it had run every sum for 6 days. The fire, the cost, the no enough, the 30 years it bought and the long life it didn't, the 14 people in the hold who had run her own sum back at her and refused to leave one, including the one who said it, the whole ledger of what it meant to be a thing that healed from anything and could not, on its own, ever stop healing long enough to grow old. He watched her carry the sum all the way to its close, cold and total and without a wasted term, and arrive, exactly as the old convoy man had said she would, at the other answer. "Yes," Mara said, flat, unhurried, the largest small word she had said in 6 days. "Because I've got 14 people who need me to grow old, and a world full of people who are about to get handed this fire whether they're ready or not, and somebody's going to have to be the one who's carried it longest and learned how to make it stop. That's not going to be a thing that burns out at 30. She looked at him. "Do it. And surgeon, you keep no key. If I ever find you've kept a key, one thread of one key, I'll know, because I take buildings apart for a living and I'll take you apart too, and I won't be cold about it. That's the one time I'll spend the second on being warm." "No key," Veith said. "You hold the whole of it. I built it that way on purpose." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, tending the small human who had broken his whole civilization's oldest certainty in an afternoon, and he gave her the true answer, because she was the one thing in the galaxy he had met that the truth was never wasted on. "Because for 9,000 seasons my people held the key and called it mercy," he said. "And it was never mercy. It was fear wearing mercy's face, fear of what a body does when no one holds its leash, fear of what we'd become if we ever let go of our own. And you're the thing we were afraid of. You're a body with no one holding its leash. And the first thing you did with it was give it away in a burning corridor to the ones who wronged you. And the second thing you did was ask the one who meant to slag you whether she wanted it too. And the third thing you did was slide off a bench half dead because you'd spent yourself keeping 14 people alive." He set his healed hands to the break and to her. "I held a key for 200 seasons and never once became a thing worth trusting with it. You've held no key for 6 days, and I'd trust you with mine and the primes and every key the we've ever kept. So I built you a break with no key in it, because You're the first thing I ever met that deserved to hold the whole of its own leash. Now hold still. This is the one careful thing I know how to do, and I'm going to do it right." He gave Mara Kell the break, one thread, hers alone, and the small gray body on the hold bench let the fire bank for the first time in 6 days, and the know enough that had made her unkillable learned, gently, from a thread of the thing that had once been a leash, how to say enough. And she slept, really slept, the deep unguarded sleep of a creature that had not been able to afford one in longer than the week, and the 14 in the hold watched their officer finally rest, and did not say anything. Because some things you keep the quiet for. Drut kept the quiet with them. The gray-cast chief sat across the hold with his healed throat and his weapon set aside, and he watched the Sethiri surgeon tend the human, and Veith caught his eye once and saw, in the flat gray face, a thing that had no name in any of the 3 tongues aboard, the look of a creature that had shot a thing through the heart and been healed by it, and had not yet finished understanding what that made him. They would have a long time to understand it. They were flying home to a world that was going to hand this fire to everyone, and the 2 of them, a surgeon and a chief who had crossed everything they were going to be the only 2 Sethiri on it, carrying in their healed flesh the proof of what the weave had burned a reach to hide. "They'll come," Drut said quietly across the sleeping hold. "The weave, for all of us." "Yes," Veith said, "they'll come." And when they come, the chief looked at the small, sleeping human and at the 14 around her, and at the 2 Sethiri who had burned their own reach to move them. What happens? Veith looked at Mara Kell sleeping her first real sleep, at the break she held the whole of, at the fire she carried and never once made a weapon of, and gave the gray-cast chief the truest answer he had, the answer 6 days and a burning reach had taught him. "They'll do what I did," Veith said. "They'll come to leash a thing they're sure is beneath them, and they'll cut it to learn a number, and it'll lie still and study them the whole time, and it'll tell them the truth because the truth costs it nothing, and one afternoon the leash will drown in it and they'll understand too late that they were never the surgeons." He watched her breathe, slow and even and resting at last. "And then it'll offer them the fire. No key, no ration, the way she offered it to me and to you and to the Prime. And every one of them will have to decide, the way the Prime decided, whether they're brave enough to carry it, or whether they'd rather burn small, holding a leash, so they never have to find out what they'd become without one." He was quiet a moment. "The weave's going to lose, Drut. Not because we're weaker, because we spent 9,000 seasons being too afraid to hold our own leash, and they never once were. You can't beat a thing that isn't afraid of what it is. You can only become it or burn." The weave was waiting at the Ashet verge, the way Veith had known it would be. It was a single picket, a lean cephalopod crude cutter of the border service, mottled gray hulls and a fast gun. The kind of ship the weave kept at a verge to stop exactly the kind of thing a stolen med-courier full of unmanifested inventory was. It hailed them in the flat, clean cant of the border service, and it hailed them, Veith noted, not with a warning but with an order, the confident order of a service that had never once had a med-courier refuse it, and the order was the same order that had started all of it 6 days ago. Sedate the cargo, hold for boarding, submit the manifest. Mara Kell was awake for it. She had slept the long, deep sleep of the braked fire and woken clear-eyed and gray no longer, and she stood in the courier's small bridge with the surgeon and the chief and the old convoy man, and watched the picket's order scroll across the Sethiri display, and she took it apart the way she took everything apart. "They don't know what's aboard," she said. "They've got a stolen courier and a scuttled reach behind it and an order to hold anything that runs from the burn. That's all. They think they're stopping cargo." She looked at Veith. "You're going to answer them, not me, you. A first surgeon of the weave aboard in command. They'll believe you the way your SEALs believed you, right up until they don't. And by the time they don't, I want them close enough to see." "See what?" "What they're stopping." Mara's flat eyes held his. "You want the leash to end, surgeon. Then it doesn't end in a burning corridor where nobody's left to tell it. It ends in front of a ship of the Weave, close aboard, watching. So the first thing the border service ever learns about a grade 9 range that broke the renewal is the true thing, told plain, and not whatever the Prime scuttling report would have called it. Open the channel. Tell them the truth. Let them come look. So Veith opened the channel, and did the thing he had spent 6 days learning to do, which was to tell the truth to a thing that was sure it already knew everything. Border Picket, this is First Surgeon Veith of the Ashet Reach Ward, in command of this courier. His voice was steady, procedural, the voice of 200 seasons of authority no one questioned. The Reach is scuttled under the Prime Adept's containment order. This courier carries survivors of a grade 9 terminal survey range and 2 set theory of the ward. I am not going to sedate the cargo, and you are not going to board, and I am going to tell you why, and then I am going to let you come close enough to confirm it, because the border service should learn this from a first surgeon, and not from a scuttling report the Prime is no longer alive to file. He paused. The renewal broke. In a human host it multiplied past all control and past all leash, and the human it broke in is aboard this courier, and she has grafted it, unleashed, into the 2 set theory you are being ordered to recover. Your sedatives will not seat, your gun will not finish what it hits, and your order to hold us assumes a leash that no longer exists. Come close and confirm it, Picket. That's all I'm asking. Come look at the thing you've been told to stop. There was a long silence on the channel, the particular silence of a border service that has just been handed a fact its whole certainty has no shelf for. Then the picket came close, because a cephalopod officer of the border service was, above all, a thing that confirmed, and it came alongside the med courier at the Ashet Verge in the pale light of the Verge's distant sun, close aboard, its fast gun trained and useless, its crew at the ports, and it really looked, the way the Prime had looked, the way Veith himself had looked 6 days ago across a cradle, at what it had been ordered to stop. It saw 14 brand-marked Deathworld humans, wounded and unbroken. It saw a gray-cast chief of its own service, throat healed past the scars of a killing wound, standing easy. It saw a first surgeon of the Weave on the wrong side of a scuttling order, telling it the truth. And it saw, in the center of the small bridge, a small gray woman, ordinary-faced, dirt still in the creases of her human skin, watching the picket's crew through the port with the flat total attention of a thing that had already taken their ship apart into parts and found, in it, whatever moved. Marakel lifted one hand, not a threat, not a weapon, just a hand, small and human and scarred, and pressed the flat of it to the port glass, close aboard, so the cephalopod crew could see it, and she said, in the flattened trade can't the intake trials had beaten into her throat, evenly, without heat, the thing that ended the leash for the first ship of the Weave to learn it was finished. You've got an order to hold us. Go ahead and try. I'll heal from your gun, and your surgeon aboard will heal from your gun, and your chief will heal from your gun, and when you run out of gun you'll still have the order, and it still won't do anything, and everybody on your bridge will have watched it not do anything. She spread her scarred fingers on the glass. Or you can log it true and pull off and let us fly home, and go tell your service the one fact that matters, that the shelf they've been drawing clients from for 9,000 seasons just learned the shape of the thing you kept for yourselves, and it's not coming to take it back from you. It's already got it. We grow it now. All it wants is to fly home. She held the officer's eye through 2 panes of glass and the pale Verge light. I'm not spending a second of my flight on killing a picket that was only following an order, but I'll spend all of them healing through you if you make me. Your call, picket. You're the part that moves now. The border picket held its useless gun on the med courier for a long moment at the Ashet Verge. Then it logged it true and pulled off and let them fly home, because a cephalopod officer of the border service was, above all, a thing that confirmed, and it had just confirmed the one fact that the whole architecture of the Weave had spent 9,000 seasons making sure no one ever confirmed, That the leash was a thing you could only keep as long as no one on the other end of it decided, cold and unhurried and unafraid, that they were done being held. Veith watched the picket fall away behind them into the verge light, and understood that Mara Kell had done, in front of a ship of the weave, the thing she had been doing since the cradle, not winning exactly. Ending. She did not beat the picket. She showed it plainly, close aboard, that its whole certainty was already over, and let it choose to live inside the new fact instead of dying to defend the old one. Mercy that was also arithmetic. She did not have a second to spend killing a picket, so she spent it teaching the picket the truth instead. And the truth, told plain to a thing close enough to confirm it, was the most total weapon Veith had ever watched deployed, because there was no healing from it and no leash on it and no coming back from having seen it. "Course is clear," Akafir said quietly from the small bridge. "Verge is open, home from here." He looked at Mara and then at the two Sethiri, and the hard old face did the nameless thing one more time. "All of us." The human world came up under them out of the dark, and Veith saw, for the first time, the well he had reached down into. It was not what the registry had taught him to expect. The registry marked it a grade 9 terminal world, one step below the sealed grades, and the notation had always meant, in a Sethiri's careful mind, a thing of teeth and storm and constant dying, a place so hostile that whatever it grew had to be made of the hostility. And it was hostile. Veith could read it even from orbit, in the great turning weather systems, the wide cold oceans, the scars of old fires across whole continents, a world that had spent its every age asking everything of everything that lived on it. But that was not the thing that stopped his healed breath as the courier came down through the enormous pale sky. The thing that stopped his breath was that it was beautiful, and that it was covered, edge to edge, in the lights of the things that had refused to die on it. "That's it," Akafir said quietly at the port, and there was a roughness in the old convoy man's voice that had nothing to do with the fire's cost. "That's home." He looked at the Sethiri surgeon beside him. "You logged it a death world, surgeon, grade 9 terminal, one below sealed." A hard old smile. "We just call it where we're from." The courier came down into a bright daylight port on the edge of one of the scarred continents, and Veith stepped out of a stolen Sethiri hull onto the ground of a grade 9 terminal world, into a wind that would have been merely weather to a human, and was, to a Sethiri, a thing with weight and grit and intent. And he stood in the pouring daylight of the well he had reached into and watched 14 brand-marked survey humans come home. It was not a quiet homecoming, and it was not a loud one. It was the homecoming of a people who lived where everything asked everything, fast and competent, and without a wasted motion, medics already moving up the ramp for the 4 who couldn't stand, a perimeter already set, the whole apparatus of a world that had spent its every age learning that you did not stand around when your people came back wounded. You moved, all of you, at once, and you sorted the grief for later. Veith watched them work and understood the last thing about the well, the thing the registry could never have told him, that a world which asks everything of everything does not grow monsters. It grows a people who move together, fast and cold and total, toward the ones who need them, because on a grade 9 well, the thing that lives is never the strongest or the fiercest. It is the one that does not leave one. They did not leave the two Sethiri, either. That was the thing Veith had not let himself expect, that a first surgeon who had cut their officer 9 times and a gray-cast chief who had shot her through the heart would be met, on the ground of the world they had wronged, with anything but the ending they had earned. He had made his peace with the ending. He had crossed his prime and burned his reach, and he had assumed, somewhere under the arithmetic, that the far side of it was a human world's justice, and that a human world's justice on a grade 9 well would be a cold and total thing. It was cold, it was total, it was not what he'd assumed. "They cut me," Mara Kell said to the perimeter, to the medics, to the hard competent people of her hard competent world, standing small and gray and unhurried at the foot of the ramp with the two Sethiri behind her. Both of them. The surgeon opened me up 9 times to learn a number, and the chief put a hole through my heart in a corridor. She let it stand a moment flat, so all of it was said. And then the surgeon crossed his whole people to hold a door open for us, and the chief held a spine behind him, and both of them burned their own reach to move 14 of ours off a shelf that was going to slag us as inventory. So here's the arithmetic, and it's not a vote. Her flat eyes moved over her people. They're mine. What they were, they answered for in a burning corridor. What they are because they crossed everything to be it. Anybody who wants to open the old account can open it with me first, and I'll be cold about it, and you all know exactly how cold. She looked at Veeth and Drut. They're carrying the fire, the unleashed one. And the surgeon's carrying the one thing none of the rest of us have the way to make it stop, to bank it, to let it grow old instead of burning out. We're going to hand this world a gift it isn't ready for, whether it's ready or not. And when we do, his craft is the difference between a range of people who heal from anything and burn out at 30 and a range of people who heal from anything and live. She let that stand too. So no, we're not leaving one. Not even the 2 who came the hard way to us. And the hard, competent people of the grade 9 well looked at the 2 Sethiri who had cut and shot their officer and then burned a reach for her. And did the arithmetic their whole world had bred into them, and arrived cold, total, unsentimental at the same sum their officer had, because it was the only sum a well like theirs ever came to in the end. You do not leave one. Not the wounded. Not the ones who crossed everything to reach you. Not even in the end. The ones who came the hard way, if the hard way was the whole distance and they walked all of it. Veeth stood in the pouring daylight of the well he had reached into, on the ground of a world he had been taught to call a death, among a people who did not leave one, and understood that he had spent 200 seasons on the wrong side of the only true border in the galaxy. It had never run between the leashed and the leash holders. It had run between the ones who were afraid of what they'd become without a leash, and the ones who had been forged by a hard enough world that they already knew and carried it, and did not ration, and did not leave one. He was on the right side of it now. It had cost him a reach, a prime, and 200 seasons of standing, and it was the only true thing he had ever done, and he would spend the rest of a long, unrationed life. Because he would live long now, the break would see to that, once he'd taught himself the craft of his own. Being worth the far side of the border, a small gray human had carried him across without once being asked to. The gift went out across the well the way Mara Kell did everything, carefully, without a wasted motion, and on terms that belonged to the ones who took it. It was not a flood, though it could have been. That was the thing Veeth watched with a surgeon's astonishment across the seasons that followed, that a world handed the ungoverned power to knit its own flesh, did not tear itself apart reaching for it. The humans took it the way they took everything on a grade 9 well, soberly, competently, one careful graft at a time, and they took the break with it always, because Mara Kell had stood in front of her people on the first day and told them the plain arithmetic, that a fire with no enough in it burned you down to nothing, and that the whole point of being from a world that asked everything was that you learned to carry a thing and make it stop. So Veeth taught the break. It became his life's work and his atonement in one, the first surgeon of a dead reach teaching a hard, competent people how to hold the whole of their own leash with no key kept back. And he was good at it, better than he had ever been at the leashing. Because, for the first time in 200 seasons, the careful thing he was building was a door instead of a cage. Drut found his own atonement in the perimeter. The gray-cast chief who had shot their officer through the heart became, across the seasons, the thing a hard world does with a creature that crossed the whole distance to reach it. He became one of the ones who did not leave one. He stood the far watches. He carried the 4 who couldn't stand. And when the weave came, because the weave came, of course the weave came, a leash that can be broken is no leash, and a people whose peace rested on it had to answer the shelf that broke it. The gray-cast chief was on the line beside the humans. healed and unhurried and unafraid. And the weave found at the HFY exactly what Veith had promised Drud it would find in a quiet hold on the flight home. They found a small still thing that studied them the whole time they cut it. They found a range that lay flat and let them try, and told them the truth because the truth cost it nothing, and watched them spend their certainty against a shelf that healed from everything and did not leave one. They found, ship by ship, verge by verge, the thing the prime adept had chosen to burn small rather than face, that you cannot leash a thing that is not afraid of what it is, and that the registry had marked one below sealed had spent its every age growing exactly the thing the weave had spent 9,000 seasons too afraid to become. Some ships logged it true and pulled off. Some did not and spent their guns and learned. The leash was finished. It had been finished since a forearm closed under a surgeon's hands on a bright afternoon, and everything after was only the galaxy catching up to a fact a small gray human had stated on the third day and been logged for talking too much. Veith saw Mara Kell, one last time in the way that mattered, some years on the ground of the well, in the ordinary daylight of an ordinary day. She was older. That was the thing that undid him, the thing that closed the whole 6 days and the whole reckoning into one quiet fact. She was older. The break had done its work. The fire banked when there was nothing to heal, and let her spend her body on living instead of on not dying. And so the small gray woman who had walked out of a scuttling reach had done the thing the Cytherea had spent 9,000 seasons ensuring no one who carried the fire ever got to do. She had grown older. There was gray in her hair that was not the fire's gray. There were lines at her eyes that her body, which could smooth away a killing wound, had chosen to keep, the way it had always kept her scars, the record of a hard life on a hard world, carried on purpose, because a thing that can undo anything learns that the only things worth keeping are the ones you choose not to undo. She was doing nothing remarkable. She was sitting in the daylight at the edge of the port she had come home to, watching a line of new grafts come off a transport, more of her people, more of the fire going out careful and braked across the well, and she had a cup of something warm in her scarred hands, and she was not standing guard, and she was not running an arithmetic, and she was not, for once, taking anything apart into parts. She was resting. She had earned the resting the hard way, the whole distance, and she was taking it the same way she had taken everything, without a wasted motion and on her own terms. Veith came and sat beside her, the surgeon and the death-world human, in the pouring ordinary daylight, and for a while neither of them said anything, because some things you keep the quiet for. "They still coming," Mara said finally. Not a question. She never asked questions when a statement would do the accounting. "They'll always come," Veith said, "for a while, until enough of them do the arithmetic the prime wouldn't." He watched the new grafts come off the transport, the fire going out careful across the well, and then they'll stop, not because we beat them. Because you can't keep coming forever to leash a thing that answers your gun by offering you the same gift with no key on it and means it. Eventually even the weave runs out of ships willing to spend themselves proving a leash exists that everyone aboard can see doesn't. He looked at her. "You ended it, you know. The whole 9,000 seasons of it. On a cradle, the first afternoon before you'd even stood up." Mara Kell considered that, the way she considered everything, and Veith watched her run it and find, evidently, that the sum came out true. She took a slow drink of the warm thing in her scarred hands, unhurried, and she did not smile, because she had never once smiled in all the time he had known her, and she did not need to, because the not smiling was the whole of her and always had been. "I didn't end anything," she said. "You gave me a leash and told me it was a gift. I gave it back to everybody with no leash on it and told them it was the truth." She watched the daylight on the port. "That's not ending a war, surgeon. That's just refusing to be held. Turns out that's the only thing a leash was ever holding back." She finished the warm thing in her hands, unbothered, and set the cup down, and went back to watching her people come home to the world the galaxy had been afraid of for the wrong reasons all along. and Veith sat beside her in the pouring ordinary daylight of a grade 9 well, an old Sethiri who would grow older now, and understood that the most dangerous thing he had ever put on a table had never been the fire, or the healing, or the range that multiplied his gift past all his control. It had been a small, quiet person who was not afraid of what she was, and who had looked at the oldest leash in the galaxy, and simply, without anger, without a raised voice, in the length of an afternoon, declined to wear it.